Chapter 486. At the end of the alley was a bustling red light district. What was a red light district? To put it bluntly, it was a place where brothels gathered. Gu Qishaw's gloomy eyes finally broke into a smile. His eyes shone as brightly as the stars in the sky. He had a pair of eyes that loved to smile. Unfortunately, Han Yunxi had never noticed it. He exclaimed, "Little girl, we're saved." Just as he finished speaking, a sharp arrow pierced through his back like a hot knife through butter. Its power was completely different from any of the previous crossbow bolts. Ha! Gu Qishaw grunted and spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood quickly flowed down his black hood and dripped onto Han Yunxi's face. Gu Qishaw! Han Yunxi cried out in alarm. Her heart nearly stopped beating. "Poison lass, don't be afraid." Even his voice had become gentler. It was no longer sinister or frightening. Instead, there was a hint of a smile in his gentleness and a hint of playfulness in his smile. It was so familiar. Han Yunxi was so stunned that she forgot about the danger around her. She froze in his arms. Another arrow pierced through the air. Gu Qishaw did not hesitate to bring Han Yunxi out of the alley. Their sudden appearance alarmed many passers-by. "Murder! Murder!" Gu Qishaw shouted as he fled. Even though they were already quite far from the capital and were about to leave the city, the ruckus he caused would definitely attract the attention of the soldiers. Sure enough, the crossbowmen did not pursue them after they left the alley. However, the black-robed assassin did not let them go. He stepped on the rooftops of the alleyway and shot arrows as he gave chase. The powerful arrow from earlier had been shot by him. However, he had not aimed it at Han Yunxi but Gu Qishaw. Gu Qishaw did not run far. Instead, he unexpectedly barged into a large brothel. His sudden appearance in his blood-stained black robes immediately caused a commotion. The brothel's occupants were thrown into chaos as they fled in all directions. Even though the black-robed assassin had caught up to them in time, he could not find Gu Qishaw and Han Yunxi in the crowd. Where is he? The first floor was crowded with people. Everyone was running out. The prostitutes and customers on the second and third floors were also rushing downstairs with their clothes in disarray. However, there were also many people whose rooms were still closed. The black-clothed expert soared into the air and landed on the railing of the second floor. This action startled another group of people. The entire brothel was in an uproar. The black-clothed expert coldly swept his gaze over the crowd, but he still did not see Gu Qishaw and Han Yunxi. He was not in a hurry. His gaze was steady and shrewd. He scanned the stairs and railings one by one, and soon found a bloodstain on one of the railings. Gu Qishaw had been hit by so many arrows, so he must have lost a lot of blood. A determined look flashed across his eyes. He followed the bloodstains to the third floor and soon arrived at the door of a room. However, when he kicked in, he found that there was nothing in the room. Where is he? He immediately kicked open the doors of the surrounding rooms. His actions were swift and ruthless. He naturally had to be on guard against Han Yunxi and the others using poison. Unfortunately, after kicking open more than 10 rooms, he found that they were either empty or occupied by someone who was having sex on the bed. If they were not enjoying themselves, how could they not have heard such a huge commotion in the brothel? Could it be that they had escaped from the brothel? The black-clothed expert was about to leave when he saw that the door to the room at the end of the corridor was tightly shut. He did not give up and carefully walked over. After preparing his crossbow, he viciously kicked open the door. Who is it? The man on the bed immediately roared. The black-clothed expert walked out from behind the screen and saw an extremely beautiful man on the bed. He was half naked and was lying on top of a woman. The woman was clearly frightened and was curled up in the man's arms, shivering. Her face was hidden. The black-clothed expert seemed to recognize this man. He was slightly startled but quickly regained his senses. His sharp gaze swept across the man and woman on the bed. Although both of them were naked, the silk quilt covered their bodies, so he could not see everything. The man's legs were long and slender, full of strength. The woman's legs were fair and well-proportioned. One above the other, and the other below, they were intertwined. Of course, most of their bodies were still covered by the silk quilt. The man's shoulders and arms were exposed, and one of his hands was propped up on the bed. The woman's hair was disheveled, and her sexy collarbone was faintly discernible. Such a lively scene, but under the black-clothed expert's sharp gaze, the atmosphere became tense. However, the extremely beautiful man soon narrowed his eyes dangerously and said coldly, "Do you want to die?" The black-clothed expert's gaze was complicated. He looked around the room again and said coldly, "My apologies for offending you." He slowly retreated. However, as soon as he heard the sounds of soldiers coming from downstairs, he quickly retreated and fled. At this time, the two people on the bed breathed a sigh of relief. That was close, that was close. Under their feet, there was a pile of bloody clothes and a medical kit hidden in the bed. The most conspicuous thing was the black robe that was soaked in blood. Beside the medical kit, there were also a few medicine bottles scattered. The man's other hand was propped up, trapping the woman between his arms. He narrowed his bewitching eyes, licked his lips naughtily, and stared at the woman below him with interest. That expression was like a wolf that had trapped a sheep, ready to tear it apart and eat it at any time. It had to be said that although this wolf looked thin, his figure was definitely first class. His exposed chest muscles were clearly defined, tempting one's imagination. However, this woman was not interested at all. Her brows were tightly knitted, and her eyes were red. She stared at the man's face, as if she was about to cry. "Poison lass, you don't have to thank me. If you're touched, why don't you repay me with your body?" The man smiled. The woman almost threw a punch at him, but fortunately, she stopped in time. She angrily said, "Goo, get down right now." Big brother, I really don't want to." Goo sighed softly. "Do you want to die? Hurry up and get down, I'll treat your wounds." Han Yunshi said angrily. She never thought that Gu Chi-sha was actually Gu. When she heard Gu's voice at the entrance of the alley, she could not believe it and thought that she had misheard. But now that they were here, in order to avoid being hunted down by the black-robed men, they hid in a room and cleaned up the bloodstains as quickly as possible. Gu Chi-sha took off his black robe, black mask, and his bony fake hands. Only then did she confirm that he was really Gu. The situation was urgent, so she did not have time to be shocked. She hurriedly treated his wounds to stop the bleeding. The two of them had taken off their clothes and put on a show to fool the black-robed men. Now, she wanted nothing more than to hang this guy up and interrogate him. Why did he have to use two identities to trick her? She treated him as a friend, but he dared to lie to her. What was his motive? Of course, she did not have time to be angry or question him. She had to hurry up and treat Gu's wounds. The arrow wound on his back was too terrifying. She had only used an emergency hemostatic medicine to stop the bleeding, but the medicine would wear off very quickly. "You, get down here." Han Yunshi's tone was commanding. However, Gu did not move and only looked at her with a smile. If Han Yunshi had been paying attention, she would have noticed that Gu's smile was especially blissful. Unfortunately, her attention was completely focused on his arrow wound. "Are you getting down or not?" Han Yunshi threatened coldly. She was so anxious that she did not mind his teasing and had even forgotten about her disheveled clothes. Poison lass, let me hug you for a while, okay? Gu asked seriously. Han Yunxi was angry and was about to push him away when Gu hugged her tightly and buried his head in her bare and warm shoulder as he whispered softly into her ear, Poison lass, Chi brother, I really like you. Han Yunxi was stunned by his words and was about to open her mouth when Gu sighed, I want to die in your arms. Originally Han Yunxi did not know how to face his seriousness, which she had never seen before. However, after hearing his sigh, she couldn't help but roll her eyes. Gu, will you die if you don't joke around? Don't think that I won't dare to do anything to you just because you're seriously injured. After she said that, she decisively pushed Gu away fiercely. However, Gu did not have much energy left and with her push, he fell sideways onto the couch. He was bare-chested and his trousers were still on, but they were rolled up very high. Han Yunxi was the same and her outer garment was wrapped tightly around her chest. Once the quilt was pulled away, the two of them could not be considered naked. Gu weakly turned over and sprawled on the couch. Han Yunxi looked at his back and her heart suddenly throbbed with pain. It was so painful that even breathing was difficult. When she was trying to stop his bleeding earlier, she did not take a good look before hastily applying medicine. Now that she took a closer look, she saw that his entire back was covered with arrow wounds. Each wound was as big as a thumb and some were deep and some were shallow. Some had even started to bleed. It would not be an exaggeration to say that his entire body was covered in cuts and bruises. When faced with such a situation, as a doctor, her first instinct was to quickly treat the wounds and stop the bleeding. However, at this moment, she pursed her lips tightly and tried her best not to cry. When he saw that Han Yunxi was still not moving, Gu Qixia turned to look at her. When he saw that her eyes were red and she looked like she was about to cry, his smiling eyes suddenly softened. Poison lass, don't worry. I won't die. Han Yunxi finally regained her senses and glared fiercely at him. Lie down and stop talking. She quickly took out 5 large life-saving medicinal pills and gave them to Gu. Normally, she would only give 1 small pill during first aid. Only the heavens knew how frantic her heart was under her calm exterior. Gu smiled. Poison lass, isn't this too nutritious? Don't try to show off. Han Yunxi personally fed Gu the pills and ordered him to lie down and not speak. In her opinion, this guy was only trying to show off by being able to laugh and joke around. How could he still have the energy to joke around when he was so heavily injured and had lost so much blood? Gu obediently lay down and snuck a peek at her. Although he did not say anything, he was smiling faintly and looked especially blissful. Han Yunxi had prepared a pile of medicine, gauze, and cotton swabs. Everything was done neatly and professionally. However, when she sat down cross-legged next to him and was about to treat him, she could not help herself in the end. She covered her mouth and turned her head to the side. Her heart ached so much. For the readers, Jean Mo's Sina Weibo account name was I am Jean Mo. They would not be able to find it by typing in Jean Mo. Chapter 487. Heartache. Heartache was unable to describe how Han Yunxi was feeling at this moment. The number of patients she had come into contact with in both her previous and current life added up to more than 10,000 people. She had seen many who were more severely injured than Gu. She was a very dedicated poison doctor, but she wasn't a good-tempered one. Every time a patient screamed out in pain or fear, she would reprimand them. How could it not hurt when he was injured? There was no use in shouting. He would never recover if he didn't get treated. But facing Gu's back, which was covered with arrow wounds, she felt heartache for him. It was all to save her, otherwise this fellow wouldn't be in such a state. If she wasn't so useless and knew some martial arts, or had better poison skills, this fellow wouldn't have been injured so badly. Besides feeling heartache, Han Yunxi's heart was filled with guilt and self-reproach. Gu saw that she was about to cry and he was so happy that he laughed. "Poison lass, cry if you want to." He liked it when she cried for him. If she cried only for him, he would be even happier. This fellow was already in such a state and he was still so shameless. Han Yunxi glared fiercely at him and ignored him as she immediately started to treat his wounds. Gu's back had too many injuries and they were all thumb-sized holes. They were densely packed and were all badly mutilated. God knows what those people's arrows were. Once they entered a person's body, they immediately rebounded and fell like a sword, causing a second injury and increasing the rate of bleeding. Han Yunxi was afraid that once the effect of the emergency hemostatic medicine wore off, Gu would lose a lot of blood. Although this fellow was still trying to show off his ability, his face was already very pale. She made a prompt decision to apply another round of emergency hemostatic medicine and started to treat each wound carefully from top to bottom. Previously, when she applied the medicine to avoid the black-robed expert, the situation was urgent and Gu didn't feel anything. But this time when the medicine was applied on his wounds, Gu really felt the pain. It was so damn painful. He had been afraid of pain since he was young and was extremely afraid. However, not only did he not show it, he even laughed and turned to look at Han Yunxi. "Poison lass. Your eyes are clearly red, and your heart is aching. You bitch, get down on your stomach. Do you want to die?" Han Yunxi immediately cursed. It was not because she was embarrassed and angry that her eyes were red, nor was it because she was worried about his wound. She was just depressed that this guy was about to die from his injury. Why was he still so restless and teasing her all the time? The wound would bleed once the medicinal effect wore off. If it wasn't treated within an hour, this fellow would definitely die from excessive blood loss. You only know how to show off. You only know how to tease. Her heart ached so much. Why didn't he feel any heartache for himself? Gu suddenly stopped laughing and asked faintly, "Girl, are you afraid that I'll die?" She didn't know if Han Yunxi was too serious to hear her or if she heard her and was too lazy to answer. In short, she ignored her. Gu also stopped joking and obediently laid down on his stomach and closed his eyes. He was indeed powerless, but it wasn't fatal. He had an immortal body. As long as he was willing, not to mention one batch of crossbow archers, even if there were 10 batches, he would still be able to meet the arrows head-on and kill them all. But he had to hide the secret of his immortal body. He could only carry Han Yunxi and escape. He could only pretend that he was extremely weak and stubbornly try to show off. Although this woman's poison skills were exquisite and her medical skills were average, but if he wasn't careful, it was very possible that she would discover something strange. At this moment, Han Yunxi had already treated 2 wounds, disinfected, applied medicine and stopped the bleeding. The wounds were densely packed and she couldn't bandage them one by one. She pondered over whether to quickly treat all the wounds or she would have to wrap Gu up like a dumpling. Of course, although she didn't say it, she was not only concerned about Gu's wounds, but also his complexion, pulse and mental state. Although he was seriously injured, this guy did seem to be in good condition. She only thought that Gu was just trying to show off. In addition, she had already given him 5 large life-saving medicinal pills. With Gu's physique as a martial arts practitioner, his performance wasn't too abnormal. The room was silent. Gu's entire body relaxed, but Han Yunxi's nerves were taut. Her entire body was tense, and her hands didn't stop moving for a moment. She was nimble and straightforward, precise and experienced. So far, the wounds she treated weren't deep, so it was easy to treat. She even forgot that she had a wound on her right shoulder as well. Because the arrow had been shot so deeply, the 3CUN bolt was still embedded in her flesh. Gu Qishao was probably too happy to notice it. At this moment, Han Yunxi found a very deep wound. She had just used disinfectant to clean the coagulated blood when a gush of blood spurted out. She panicked and decisively took out the strongest medicine to stop the bleeding and sprinkled it on the wound. Gu quivered and his body trembled. His bloody skin and flesh were lacerated. When the medicine came into contact with the blood, it bubbled. Gu was in so much pain that he couldn't bear it. Although his smile was ugly, he still grinned. "Poison lass, are you plotting to kill me? Plotting to kill me?" He was in so much pain, and he could still say that. Han Yunxi really wanted to tell him that she was convinced, but she didn't have the time. She looked serious as she continued to apply medicine while plugging the wound. However, the bleeding didn't stop. She didn't hesitate and immediately applied anesthesia on Gu. This wound had to be stitched up, and the sooner the better. Without anesthesia, Gu Beiyue's wound became numb and the pain gradually disappeared. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't know how Poison Lass had tormented his wound, but he was very relieved. After a moment of silence, he couldn't help but turn back to look. Of course, he couldn't see Han Yunxi's hand movements. All he could see was Han Yunxi's serious little face. "Poison Lass, you're quite scary like this. Poison Lass, what are you doing? Poison Lass, how long will it take? I'm a little hungry." Han Yunxi didn't pay him any attention. He was simply talking to himself, but he seemed to be enjoying himself. As he spoke, his gaze couldn't help but move downwards and fixed on her naked neck. It was fair and delicate, as clear as ice and jade. He realized that this woman had a very nice-looking collarbone. He couldn't help but stare blankly and gradually quieted down. At this moment, footsteps were heard from outside the door. It seemed that the soldiers had arrived. A trace of displeasure flashed past Gu's eyes. He suddenly grabbed the blanket and covered Han Yunxi and himself completely. Han Yunxi was busy stitching up his wound and being disturbed. She got angry. "What are you doing? So be it if the soldiers were here. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to find him in the entire city." She was about to pull the blanket away when Gu suddenly flipped over and pulled her back. "Sho! Are you intending to get someone to catch us in the act of adultery in bed?" Although he was frivolous, he still cared about her reputation. Han Yunxi immediately stopped. There were many things that couldn't be explained away, especially this kind of thing. It was better not to explain at all. If she didn't explain, it was better to hide it. Hence, one was lying down while the other was kneeling. With the blanket covering them, the two people in disheveled clothes put on a lively and fragrant show. When the soldiers barged in, they didn't see Han Yunxi's face, who was covered up tightly. They only saw Gu's bare arms and a look of pleasure on his face. He was enjoying himself very much. The officer glanced at them disdainfully. Seeing that there was no one hiding around, he went out. After making sure that the person had gone far away, Han Yunxi hurriedly got up and locked the door. Gu slowly turned over. The half-stitched wound was gushing out blood again. Damn it! Han Yunxi was angry and distressed. She regretted it. How could she be so muddle-headed in a moment of desperation? She really shouldn't have let Gu turn over. If she was caught in the act of adultery, so be it. If her reputation was ruined, then so be it. Those who believed her would believe her, but she didn't care about those who didn't believe her. Her hands were trembling. She impatiently waved her hands to calm herself down before she started stitching up again. Gu was really tired. He turned his head and looked at her quietly. There were a lot of wounds. There were 3 or 4 deep wounds. Han Yunxi didn't rest and kept working on them. In the small room, the strong scent of cosmetics was gradually replaced by the smell of blood. However, the air was filled with a warm atmosphere. Outside the room, the entire imperial city was in an uproar. The hidden guards in the Gu residence had not seen Gu Qixia appear, and something had happened in the fireworks district in the south of the city. Mu Qingwu was very sure that Gu Qixia and Han Yunxi had been chased all the way to the fireworks district. He acted first and reported later. He ordered the 4 city gates to be locked down and mobilized half of the Imperial Guards to search the entire city. At this time, he was personally searching the alleys of the fireworks district. The Crown Prince, Long Tianma, searched for half a day before he found him. What's the situation? We found a crossbow arrow and traces of blood here. They disappeared all the way to the entrance of a brothel. We've also searched the entire brothel, but we didn't find them. Long Tianma nodded and said in a low voice, "Send the other half of the Imperial Guards to protect the Imperial Palace." What? Mu Qingwu didn't understand. He had been thinking that if they still couldn't find them in an hour, he would have to send more men. Acting first and reporting later. If you don't find an excuse for yourself, will you be able to bear the consequences when Imperial Father blames you? Long Tianma asked seriously. Mu Qingwu was the young general and the commander of the Imperial Guards. He held the responsibility of protecting the Imperial Palace and the Imperial City. For the sake of rescuing Qin Wangfei, he not only ordered the city gates to be locked down, but also mobilized half of the Imperial Guards. What would Emperor Tianhui think? It'd be strange if he didn't seize the chance to strip him of his military power. If he mobilized half of the Imperial Guards to protect the Imperial City and escalated the matter from an assassination attempt on Qin Wangfei to an enemy infiltrating the city, then everything would be different. Mu Qingwu immediately understood Long Tianma's reminder. Your Highness's reminder is right. This soldier will do it right away. He was about to leave when Long Tianma stopped him again. He purposely dismissed the surrounding soldiers and asked in a low voice, "The Imperial Guards at the Gu residence changed sides. What's going on?" Long Tianma had just returned from the Gu residence and seen the young commander killed by a sword. Based on his understanding of Mu Qingwu, the man was honest and upright, but not stupid. He wouldn't kill a traitor out of anger. If the traitor was dead, who would they find to force out the mastermind behind the scenes? This was clearly a move to silence them, but Long Tianma had no reason to suspect Mu Qingwu. Many of his men wanted the Duke of Qin and Qin Wangfei dead, but Mu Qingwu would never do that. Chapter 488. Faced with Long Tianma's questions, Mu Qingwu's gaze was evasive. This soldier is very puzzled as well. The situation was urgent at the time, so I killed him on impulse. Fortunately, that junior commander had 2 or 3 captains under him to interrogate. This soldier has already ordered people to lock up all the suspects. On impulse. That didn't seem like Mu Qingwu's style at all. Long Tianma gave him a meaningful look. Let's not talk about that for now. Hurry into the palace, the sooner the better. Mu Qingwu left in a hurry. Long Tianma inspected the bag of crossbow bolts that Mu Qingwu had collected and discovered that these bolts were much shorter than ordinary ones. Moreover, the arrowheads were as sharp as blades. Even Imperial Uncle Qin's guards couldn't defeat them. As expected, they're not simple, he laughed cold. Your Highness, hurry and leave. It's not safe here. Those crossbow archers haven't been found yet, the attendant by his side urged. Long Tianma wasn't in a rush to leave. He took out half a bag of crossbow bolts and handed it to the attendant. Take this to the Xianlong Dragon Gate. Others might not have heard his words, but his personal attendant was very clear. Without a doubt, His Highness Crown Prince was going to use these crossbow bolts to kill the guards of the Xianlong Dragon Gate. The Emperor wasn't stupid. He wouldn't be nervous if the young general mobilized troops to protect the palace. But if he discovered that the guards of the Xianlong Dragon Gate had been killed by the crossbow bolts as well, then the emperor would get out of bed immediately even if he was ill. This subordinate understands. I'll do it immediately. The attendant obeyed and left. Long Tianma's lips curved into a sinister smile. Of course he was going to make a big deal out of this. The bigger the better. It'd be best if he could connect it to the gunpowder case at the black market. That way, Chu Qingge wouldn't even be able to keep her position as noble consort, much less the position of empress. Actually, he should have been sitting in the Eastern Palace waiting to watch the show, but he couldn't help but leave in the end. He even brought a group of attendants with him to search everywhere. The Imperial Guards had searched for so long without finding anyone. Who knew where that woman, Han Yunxi, was right now? Just how was she? Was she hurt? Such a big thing had happened, yet Imperial Uncle Qin still hadn't shown up. Could it be that he wasn't in the Imperial capital? He was still here a few days ago. If Imperial Uncle Qin went on a long trip, wouldn't he bring along Han Yunxi? Long Tianma couldn't figure it out, so he quickly led people to search everywhere. Long Fei Yi was indeed not in the city. At this moment, he was in a courtyard outside the city. In the dimly lit guest hall, the doors and windows were tightly shut. Outside, the sharp chirping of birds could be heard. This was the signal of the secret guards of the U Pavilion. Once the secret guards made such a sound, it meant that something had happened in the residence. In the quiet room, Long Fei Yi stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His entire body exuded a cold aura, making the already cold room seem even colder. The sunlight outside the window slanted in, shining on his cold and hard face, but not into his deep eyes. Beneath his feet was a pile of corpses, all of them slashed by his sword. Two people stood in front of him. One was the white-robed Duan Muyao, while the other was Tianshan Kenzo's second-in-command, Long Fei Yi and Duan Muyao's martial uncle, Zhang Qiuzi. It was only natural that Long Fei Yi would show up to honor his martial uncle's visit. But Duan Muyao had told him that his master had come and even brought his token. Thus, Long Fei Yi had come in a hurry. Duan Muyao had said that his master missed him and insisted on coming down the mountain to see him. Logically speaking, his master should have gone straight to the Duke of Qin's estate to see him. But in his current state, it wasn't appropriate for him to show his face in public. Even going to the Duke of Qin's estate was out of the question. Thus, he believed Duan Muyao when she said he was here. Who knew that he'd come to see his martial uncle Zhang Qiuzi instead of his master? Tianshan Kenzo had always been the leader of the martial arts circles. Everyone revered and feared them, and it was also the reason why the City of Daughters and Carefree City hadn't dared to stir up trouble. But who would have thought that Tianshan Kenzo had been out of the Kenzo's control for more than a decade? Long Fei Yi knew something was amiss as soon as he saw Zhang Qiuzi. He wanted to leave, but was blocked by multiple sword experts. He had no idea what had happened at the Duke of Qin's estate, but Han Yunxi was still there. Cold, he looked at Zhang Qiuzi. Fei has important matters to attend to, so it's inconvenient for him to accompany you today. I asked that martial uncle Zhang make things easier for us. Senior brother, I was wrong. I was so happy that I called martial uncle Zhang Qiuzi master. Don't be angry. It's rare for martial uncle to come down the mountain, so I wanted to invite you for a cup of tea. Why were you in such a rush? Before Duan Muyao could finish, Long Fei Yi suddenly raised his sword. Like a gust of wind, it slammed into Duan Muyao's face. Ah! Duan Muyao cried out in alarm. Her entire face burned with pain as if she'd been slapped multiple times. Duan Muyao couldn't believe it. She covered her face and began to cry. Senior brother, you hit me, you might as well kill me. Otherwise, master will feel distressed when he sees me. Long Fei Yi didn't spare her a glance, but kept his cool. Martial uncle Zhang, for master's sake, I'll have to trouble you to step aside. Zhang wasn't as impetuous as Duan Miao. He was a man in his 40s with a goatee and hair tied up in a ponytail. He was dressed in long, black robes and simple cloth shoes. He stroked his beard and sighed. Fei, you've grown up. Is it so hard for Martial Uncle to invite you for a cup of tea? Martial Uncle thought you'd be happy to come from so far away. It looks like Martial Uncle's been imagining things. Although Long Fei had already killed a bunch of Zhang Qiuxi's disciples, he still left him some face and spoke politely. Zhang Qiuxi was clearly stalling for time. Long Fei couldn't figure out what had happened at the Duke of Qin's estate to make Zhang Qiuxi show up in person to lure the tiger away from its den. Had something to do with Tianshan Kenzo? Or had Duan Miao asked Zhang Qiuxi for help? Zhang Qiuxi was a hypocrite, deceitful, and avaricious man, but he was also cautious and reserved. If it wasn't related to Tianshan Kenzo, how could Duan Miao have asked him to come down the mountain? What benefits did she give him? But Long Fei had no time to think about that. He only wanted to leave. His heart was flustered, worried that Han Yunxi would be in big trouble. What will it take for Martial Uncle to make things easier for me? Long Fei had no idea that the capital city was in an uproar, much less that Han Yunxi had been assassinated. He was still calm because he couldn't defeat Zhang Qiuxi. This fellow's sword skills were second only to his master's, especially this year. Whether it was his internal energy or sword skills, both had improved greatly. It was very possible that he could rival his master now. That was the reason why Long Fei hadn't gotten involved in Tianshan Kenzo's dark dealings. He was busy enough as it was. If he provoked Zhang Qiuxi too, he'd be asking for trouble. He hadn't returned to Tianshan Kenzo, nor did he have any major conflicts with Zhang Qiuxi. He never expected Duan Miao to find someone like this. If he made a move now, he'd only be tied down by Zhang Qiuxi. If he wanted to leave, he'd have to use his wits. But Zhang Qiuxi's tone turned cold. Fei, Martial Uncle came from afar, but you didn't give him any face. You left in a hurry without even drinking a cup of tea. Martial Uncle is really angry. What do you think we should do? Long Fei's eyes turned then. What does Martial Uncle want to do? Zhang Qiuxi was waiting for those exact words. You haven't been back to Kenzo in ages. Your master must be missing you. How about this, I'll test your internal energy on your master's behalf. How will you do that? Long Fei asked. How about you take 3 of Martial Uncle's palms? Zhang Qiuxi asked seriously. Is this really a test? It's obvious that he's looting a burning house to hurt me. Zhang Qiuxi said such hypocritical words as a matter of course. Of course Long Fei knew he was harboring ulterior motives. Although his martial arts weren't as good as Zhang Qiuxi's and he didn't want to offend him, that didn't mean he didn't dare. If he wasn't in such a hurry to leave today, he wouldn't mind sparring with Zhang Qiuxi. But the chirping outside was getting more urgent. He had to leave as soon as possible. All right. Long Fei agreed without hesitation. He sheathed his sword and clasped his hands behind his back, holding his breath as he stood there. Zhang Qiuxi chuckled in amusement before suddenly attacking. His figure blurred as his palms shot towards Long Fei's face, striking him viciously. Long Fei's body trembled slightly, but he didn't budge from his spot. Duan Miao was alarmed as her heart ached at the sight. She almost begged her martial uncle to stop, but when she thought of Han Yunxi, she held back. She thought that senior brother would be seriously injured after taking 3 of martial uncle's palms. If they didn't stop him, he wouldn't even be able to leave. Abruptly, Zhang Qiuxi's second palm hit Long Fei's back with a thud. Long Fei couldn't take it anymore and spat up a mouthful of blood. Still, he didn't move, his expression cold. Tsang Chozi's eyes flashed with astonishment. He never expected Long Fei Ye's internal energy to be so profound. It looks like I'll have to use all my strength for the third palm strike if I want to keep him here. He circled around to Long Fei Ye's side and aimed for Long Fei Ye's heart. Long Fei Ye, long time no see. You've made progress. If your master knew, he'd be happy. Long Fei Ye ignored him. Blood trickled from his lips, but he didn't look wretched at all. Instead, he gave off a dignified air that made him seem untouchable. Tsang Chozi stung his eyes as he raised both palms towards Long Fei Ye's chest. Martial uncle, don't. Duan Muyao cried out, but the palms had already struck. Long Fei Ye was sent flying before crashing into a wall. He spat up multiple mouthfuls of blood as soon as he hit the ground, his entire body dimming. Duan Muyao's heart ached as she ran over to support him. Senior brother, are you all right? But she hadn't even touched Long Fei Ye before he raised a hand. Scram! He pressed one hand to his chest and the other to his sword as support. Then he stood up with his head held high and his chest puffed out, his bearing extraordinary. Cold, he said, Martial Uncle Tsang, may we meet again someday. Seeing this, Tsang Chozi's heart gave a lurch. He never expected Long Fei Ye to rise to his feet so quickly. His martial arts skills were clearly superior to Long Fei Ye's, but now he was afraid of Long Fei Ye. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Looks like I'll have to be on guard against this guy going back to Kenzo one day to fight for the throne. Tsang Chozi wasn't in a position to stop him, but Duan Muyao was so angry that she stomped her feet. She wanted nothing more than to grab Long Fei Ye back, but she didn't dare. She could only watch as Long Fei Ye left. Meanwhile, Chu Shifeng showed up as soon as Long Fei Ye left the courtyard. He'd been waiting for ages, but Tsang Chozi's disciples had stopped him from entering. Long Fei Ye grew alarmed at the sight of Chu Shifeng. What happened? Where's Han Yunqi? Chu Shifeng was the one who made those cries just then, so something big must have happened. Chapter 489. Long Fei Ye was stunned by the sight of Chu Shifeng, but the man was even more shocked. Your Highness, you're injured. Chu Shifeng's heart lurched at the sight of the blood by His Highness Duke of Qin's lips and his ashen complexion. It was obvious that His Highness Duke of Qin had suffered severe internal injuries, or else he wouldn't be in such a state. Chu Shifeng guessed that Duan Muyao must have invited His Highness here because Tianshan Kenzo's men had shown up. But he never expected them to injure His Highness so badly. It couldn't be the old Kenzo man who doted on His Highness, so who could it be? Long Fei Ye's cold eyes flickered with impatience. Frightened, Chu Shifeng didn't dare to ask any more questions, but quickly handed over the crossbow he'd brought with him. He gave a concise account of Qin Wangfei's visit to the Gu estate, the assassination attempt there, the betrayal of the Imperial Guards, and the commotion in the fireworks district. Before Chu Shifeng could finish, Long Fei Ye had already crushed the crossbow in his hand. His face was so gloomy that it looked like water was about to drip from it. Your Highness, as this subordinate sees it, the Chu clan was behind all this. It must have been Chu Tianyin who invited Duan Muyao. Chu Shifeng had already mulled over the matter multiple times. In the past, he'd found the Western Zhou Imperial clan's rainbow signal flares from Su Xiaoyu's belongings. However, the Western Zhou Imperial clan didn't have any influence in Tianning's capital city, but the Chu clan did. Thus, the Chu clan should have gotten the flares from the Duanmu siblings. A year ago, Duanmu Yao had been crippled by the Western Zhou Imperial clan and had remained in Tianshan Kenzo without making any moves. Now that she'd come down the mountain to find Long Fei Ye, it was clear that she was cooperating with the Chu clan's plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain and plot against esteemed Wang Fei. Long Fei Ye understood all of this at once. He had plenty of time to deal with these people, but the most important thing right now was to find Han Yunxi. Send all the men from the hidden pavilion to the fireworks district. Search every house carefully for your lordship. He gave the orders and left in a hurry, so fast that Chu Shifeng couldn't catch up to him on horseback. Unfortunately, his internal injuries were too severe, so he stopped in less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea to land on a tree trunk and spit up another mouthful of blood. Who was Zhang Chuzi? He was the second most powerful man in charge of Tianshan Kenzhou. Although Cloud Realm's martial arts circles didn't have ranking tournaments, he was definitely the second strongest. Long Fei had taken all three of his palms head-on. His Highnesses was Long Fei Yi, Head Yi, of Long Fei Yi S of Fei Chu S, Saif of Fei Yez's of him. Long Fei Yi didn't reply, but suddenly flew down from the tree. Long Fei Yi had no choice but to let him have his horse, which he mounted and galloped towards the southern gates. According to Chu Shifeng's explanation, Long Fei Yi was 80% certain that Han Yunxi was still in the fireworks district. The crossbowmen had used the spies in the imperial army to betray them. There was no doubt that they were determined to succeed in this assassination. However, they had chosen to take action in the hidden Gu family and had chosen to withdraw their troops in the fireworks lane. From these 2 points, it could be seen that they were still very afraid of the imperial army in the imperial city. Or rather, it could be said that they were afraid of Emperor Tianhui. They were afraid that the personal grudge of assassinating the Wang Fei would be escalated to a major incident that would endanger the people of the imperial city and threaten the imperial palace. After the black-robed men broke into the brothel, they didn't make any other moves. Either Gu Qixia and Han Yunxi had been kidnapped by them, or they were still hiding in the brothel. Long Fei Yi had always looked down on Gu Qixia, but this time he sincerely hoped that the man could protect Han Yunxi well. Currently, the 4 gates of Tianning's capital city had long been sealed. Without Emperor Tianhui or the Imperial Guard's orders, no one was allowed to enter or leave. By the time Long Fei Yi reached the gates, it was already dark. Long Tianma and Mu Qinggu had spent half a day trying to create panic with the crossbow archers, while the other kept lying to Emperor Tianhui about the enemy. Although Emperor Tianhui could tell that the Crown Prince and the General's estate were taking advantage of the situation to exaggerate, the gunpowder incident in the black market made him uneasy. Thus, he ordered the entire city to be on guard and search for the assassins. As soon as the guards on the city walls saw His Highness Duke of Qin, they all fell to their knees. But despite that, no one dared to open the gates. Open the gates immediately! Long Fei Yi roared. The guard captain was so frightened that he cried out, "Your Highness Duke of Qin, we've already sent someone to ask His Majesty for instructions. They'll be back very soon. May your Highness remain calm." Would Long Fei Yi waste words with him? Obviously not. He leaped from his horse and flew straight to the city gates. Before the guards on the city walls could react, he had already landed in the city. Seeing this, Chu Shifeng, who'd been chasing after him, jumped over the walls as well to lead the way to the Red Lantern district. Less than an hour later, news of the Duke of Qin's return spread throughout the capital. Very soon, news of the Duke of Qin leading a large group of black-robed guards to search the Red Lantern district spread as well. His Highness Duke of Qin couldn't be wrong about the location. Thus, Emperor Tianhui didn't bother to punish Long Fei Yi for his crimes. He sent a large group of men to follow Long Fei Yi to search the Red Lantern district. Long Tianma and Mu Qinggu, who were supposed to have left the capital, not only returned, but also sent men from other places to search for the Red Lantern district. A few imperial princes, a few aristocratic families, various dukes, marquises, the Bailey army, the capital governor, and even the justice court sent men to search for the Red Lantern district. Some of them truly wanted to find Han Yunxi, while others wanted to claim credit from Emperor Tianhui. Others wanted to curry favor with His Highness Duke of Qin. No matter what their motives were, all of them had gathered at the Red Lantern District for the sake of finding a single Han Yunshi. It had to be said that Cloud Realm Continent's history had never seen such a tense situation in any of its capitals except for usurping the throne. Nor had so many forces gathered at the same time in the history of Cloud Realm Continent's brothels. Tianning's capital city was already filled with fear and trepidation to begin with, but His Highness Duke of Qin's return had turned it into an uproar. Long Fei Yi went straight to the brothel where Gu and Han Yunshi were hiding. Long Tianmo, Mu Qinggu, and the rest had also arrived with news. By now, all of the guests had fled the place. Only the procuress, the girls, and a few page boys remained. Imperial Qin Uncle. Your Highness Duke of Qin. Everyone paid their respects, all of them wanting to report the situation. Long Fei Ye's internal injuries were severe, and he'd run all the way here. Blood and qi were roiling in his 5 viscera and 6 bowels, but he forced down the taste of blood in his throat. His face was pale white and cold. He ignored the crowd and ordered the secret guards to surround the brothel and search carefully. He strode into the brothel and searched the rooms one by one. He didn't even miss the storage room and the small hall. Seeing this, Long Tianma and the rest followed suit, searching from different floors and directions. Unlike the rough and simple kicks of the soldiers, they were silent and careful, afraid of alerting the enemy. A tense atmosphere filled the entire brothel, but the people in the corner rooms on the top floor had no idea what was going on outside. Only then did they breathe a sigh of relief. By now, Han Yunshi had finished treating Gu's wounds on his back. He had too many wounds, and 5 of them needed to be stitched up. Fortunately, she'd moved quickly, and the hemostatic medicine in her medical pouch was effective enough to prevent him from losing too much blood. Of course, Gu's body was in excellent condition as well. It had to be said that she'd expended a great deal of effort to bandage his wounds. These wounds were both small and numerous, so she could only stick gauze on them one by one and seal them with medical tape. Then she wrapped a layer of white gauze around them to protect them from causing unnecessary damage. After she'd bandaged his wounds, Gu's originally well-built and well-defined upper body had become as bloated as a dumpling. When everything was finally done, Han Yunshi sighed in relief and patted the dumpling gently. "Hey, your body is unusually good. I thought you would have fainted before I finished treating your wounds." These wounds are nothing. "A few more stabs won't be a problem," Gu said, pretending to be brave. Han Yunshi snorted. In her opinion, Gu was already at his limit. If he didn't faint after a few more stabs, he must be a monster. She tidied up the medical pouch and the blood stains, then asked casually, "I heard that you're the adopted son of the Medical Academy's first elder, and that you were raised with medicine. Is that true?" A trace of hatred flashed across Gu Qisha's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. He joked, "Why else would my body be so good?" As he spoke, he prepared to turn over, but Han Yunshi gently pressed him down. "Don't move around. These wounds will take at least 2 days to form a scab. Don't move around, there's too many wounds. You'll tear them apart if you move. If you bleed again, even the Medical Academy's first elder won't be able to save you," Han Yunshi said sternly as she pulled the covers over him. All right, I'll just lie there for 2 days." Gu Qishao secretly rejoiced. He was eager for Han Yunshi to make him lie on his stomach for half a month. That way, she'd be able to stay by his side for half a month. Of course, he knew they couldn't stay here for long, but he figured that Long Fei Yi had been lured away by Duan Muyao. With the Imperial Guards and Chu Shifeng's skills, they'd probably have to wait until tomorrow to search the area again. Perfect, he could spend the night alone with his poison lass. He still hadn't told her about the antidote for broomcorn millet poison yet. After making sure that Gu wasn't moving around, Han Yunshi got off the bed. She wanted to pour some hot water for Gu to drink and find some food. She wasn't planning to go back so soon, because there were many things she needed to ask Gu Qisha. For example, why was he hiding his identity? Could he think of a way to help her find the person who'd bought the antidote for broomcorn millet poison? Just what kind of grudge did he have with Medicine City? He had such shocking medical talents and spent so much time and effort to establish Medicine Ghost Valley. Why did he choose to do evil instead of doing good? There was one more thing she remembered. When she'd been kidnapped by Jun Yixie's poison humans, this guy had saved her for a reason as well. As soon as Han Yunxi got off the bed, Gu immediately noticed the arrow wound on her other shoulder. Earlier, the two of them had been too busy avoiding the black-clothed experts to notice it. Later, Han Yunxi had been kneeling behind them the entire time and he hadn't noticed it. As for Han Yunxi, she'd been in a hurry to treat Gu's wound and had only relaxed now. She'd long forgotten about the pain and hadn't even noticed that her clothes were disheveled. Now, she even got off the bed barefooted to pour some water. How could Gu care about how beautiful her collarbone was or how pretty her jade feet were? Looking at Han Yunxi's cold, stern face, Gu Qishao's heart felt like it had overturned a bottle of mixed feelings. Ever since he'd teased her until her eyes had turned red, she'd been very serious and calm. But in reality, she was still worried about his injury. After pouring the water, Han Yunxi took a sip to make sure it was warm before bringing it to Gu. Gu suddenly sat up, startling Han Yunxi. "What are you doing? Be good, don't move." Gu Qishao gently caressed the wound on her shoulder, but the door to the room suddenly flew open. Chapter 490. The door suddenly opened. Before Han Yunxi and Gu could react, Long Feiyi walked out from behind the screen. The room was filled with an ambiguous atmosphere. The clothes on the floor were disheveled, and the room was filled with the fragrance of life. Han Yunxi's long skirt was pulled up high, exposing her calves and jade-like feet. Her top was wrapped up to her chest, leaving her shoulders and arms bare. Her hair was loosely tied up behind her back. Gu's slender legs were bare, and his upper body was completely naked. His hand was resting on Han Yunxi's shoulder. Long Feiyi was stunned. He didn't move, and his face was expressionless. After he swept his gaze over the two of them, he stared coldly into Han Yunxi's eyes. He didn't react for a long time. Han Yunxi and Gu were also very surprised. They originally thought that the intruder would be a soldier. They never imagined that it would be Long Feiyi. Didn't this guy leave the city with Duan Miao? When did this guy come back? How did he find this place so accurately? Han Yunxi's mind was filled with surprise. After all, she had steeled her heart to believe that Long Feiyi and Duanmu Yao had left. Based on how hurried they were, it would take at least 2 or 3 days for them to return. The room was silent. The three of them didn't speak. Time seemed to have stopped, and everything seemed to have fallen silent. However, Long Feiyi was even more silent than everything else. His silence was frightening. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps outside broke the tense atmosphere. Ning Jing, someone was coming. Long Feiyi expressionlessly turned to leave. When he reached the door, he suddenly slammed it shut. Bang! The entire room shook. Han Yunxi and Gu both jumped in fright. Only then did they come to their senses. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu's voices came from outside. "Imperial Uncle Qin, how is it inside?" "Your Highness Duke of Qin, is there anyone inside?" "No." Long Feiyi answered coldly without any hesitation. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu didn't delay and went to the other side to search. Long Feiyi stood at the door, and his whole person suddenly dimmed. His deep eyes were so dark that there wasn't a trace of light, as if they were bottomless pits. He cared so much about that he was angry when she took off her shoes and stockings, and he cared so much about her body that he still did not touch her. But now, she was practically naked with another man in the same place. What did they do? How long did they stay like this? Long Fei Ye's hands gradually clenched into fists, and the veins on his back popped out one by one. His monstrous anger intensified the churning of his internal organs, and his tall and proud body actually gave people the feeling that he was about to collapse. But he didn't have to wait long. When the corridor was empty, he viciously punched the door. Han Yunxi, you're still not coming out. Inside the room, Han Yunxi had just finished putting on her clothes. She was so anxious that her hands were trembling. Even though Gu repeatedly reminded her that the arrow was still in her shoulder, she didn't even look at the wound. Damn it! In order to avoid the black cloth expert, she and Gu had put on a show. That was understandable. But how could she forget to put on her clothes when she was applying medicine for Gu? How could she forget? Although she came from the modern era and it was normal for her to expose her feet and shoulders like this, she knew better than anyone else where Long Fei Ye's bottom line was. After putting on her clothes and shoes, she even forgot about the medical pouch that she always carried with her and hurriedly rushed out. But Gu pulled her back. Poison lass, your shoulder is injured. You haven't even pulled out the arrow. I won't die. Han Yunxi pushed his hand away and was about to leave when Long Fei Yi came in. Seeing the two of them tugging at each other, he simply added fuel to the fire and pointed his sword at Gu. Let go of her. Long Fei Yi, try being fierce to her again. I won't let go. Gu became unyielding. He couldn't stand seeing Long Fei Yi being so fierce to Poison Lass. He couldn't stand seeing Long Fei Yi lying to her. He couldn't stand seeing Long Fei Yi having other motives. Perhaps many people would think that he clearly knew that Han Yunxi was a married woman and yet he still insisted on it. But in reality, he clearly knew that Han Yunxi liked this man, so he didn't insist on it. If he really wanted to insist, it wouldn't be like this. As long as this woman said that she didn't like Long Fei Yi, he'd take her away immediately. Wealth, status, reputation, anything that Long Fei Yi could give her, he could give her too. Even if he didn't have any great ambitions and only wanted to take revenge on the medical academy, if Han Yunxi wanted Cloud Realm Continent, he could still fight for it for her. Gu's unyielding attitude infuriated Long Fei Yi even more. Long Fei Yi wasted no words and stabbed forward with his sword. Gu immediately pushed Han Yunxi aside and pulled out his sword to fight. But as soon as he raised his sword, the wound on his back split open and fresh blood quickly seeped through the white gauze. Han Yunxi had no idea that Long Fei Yi had suffered internal injuries. She only knew that Gu's injuries couldn't be pulled any further. Long Fei Yi, can you listen to our explanation? She asked anxiously. No. Long Fei Yi was mad with anger. Where did he get his rationality from? How many men in the world could be rational in the face of something like this? Those who were rational definitely didn't like her from the bottom of their hearts. Long Fei waved his sword and swept it across Gu Qishao's lower body. Gu Qishao immediately leaped into the air to dodge the blow, but the blood on his back dyed a large patch of white muslin red. Han Yunxi panicked when she saw Long Fei Yi swinging his sword at her again. She went mad with anxiety as well. Long Fei Yi, if you want to kill him, kill me first. Long Fei Yi froze at her words. Blood roiled in his veins, but he forced it down. His handsome brows furrowed as he stared fixedly at Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi averted her gaze. How was she speaking the truth? She only wanted these two men to calm down. Long Fei Yi, she was about to explain when Long Fei Ye's lips suddenly curled into a mocking smile. Han Yunxi, this prince has overestimated you. Han Yunxi's heart tightened. She clearly wanted to explain, but when she saw the mocking smile on his lips, her nose turned sour and she suddenly fell silent. Long Feiyi, what do you mean by that? Long Feiyi, what do you mean by smiling so disdainfully? Long Feiyi, do you know how upset I was when you whispered in Duanmu Yao's ear and left with her without any explanation? You clearly know that Duanmu Yao likes you. Long Feiyi, why are you always not here when I need you? Long Feiyi, do you know that it was Gu who risked his life to protect me? Why don't you ask us how we escaped from those crossbow archers? Long Feiyi, why is there so much in your world that you can't tell us, but in my world, you have to forcefully interfere? Seeing Han Yunxi's despairing expression, Gu's heart ached so much that he was speechless. He threw caution to the wind and circled his arms around Han Yunxi's waist from behind. Poison lass, I'll take you away. In your dreams. Long Feiyi snorted coldly. The blade of his sword circled around Han Yunxi and pierced towards Gu's glabella. Who knew that Han Yunxi would suddenly raise her hand to block? Long Feiyi couldn't stop in time and the blade grazed her hand. Blood splattered everywhere and her flesh was torn open. Long Feiyi was shocked and immediately withdrew his sword. Gu was also shocked. He pulled Han Yunxi behind him and shouted angrily, Long Feiyi, do you know that there's still an arrow in her shoulder? Long Feiyi was mad with anger. He had seen it earlier but didn't realize that it was an arrow wound. He looked towards Han Yunxi's shoulder and couldn't see the wound, only the bloodstains on her clothes. That glaring red calmed him down a lot. He went forward to look at Han Yunxi's hand, but Han Yunxi hid behind Gu and didn't look at him. This woman's gaze was always chasing after him. Even if her body was hiding from him, her gaze wouldn't leave him. When had she ever avoided him like this? Long Feiyi's blood was boiling and there was an indescribable bitterness in his heart. After a moment of silence, he said indifferently, Come here. But Han Yunxi's heart was truly hurt. She couldn't accept the sneer on his lips, so she remained silent and looked away. Gu gave a soft snort and prepared to take Han Yunxi away when Chu Shifeng burst into the room with a few guards. Chu Shifeng gave a start at the sight. He glanced at the mess of clothes on the floor and almost misunderstood. But upon closer inspection, he realized that the women's clothes didn't belong to esteemed Wang Fei, but to the brothel girls. The red robes were most likely Gu's. He had long known that His Highness had figured out that Gu Qisha was Gu and wanted to expose him, but he never expected Gu to suddenly show his face. Fine, he had no idea what had happened either. But he'd found esteemed Wang Fei and she was safe. That was good. Hearing the commotion, Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu quickly rushed over. When they saw Han Yunxi safe and sound and only lightly injured, they all exhaled in relief. Esteemed Wang Fei, we've finally found you. Are you all right? Mu Qingwu couldn't hide his concern. Her hand and shoulder are both injured. Imperial uncle, hurry and call for an imperial physician, Long Tianma said anxiously. The two of them were the main force in the hunt for the crossbow archers. They should have been asking about the black-robed assassins and the crossbow archers' whereabouts, but all their attention was on Han Yunxi instead. Instead, it was the two junior officials from the justice courts who asked, Esteemed Wang Fei, how did you escape from the assassins? When did the crossbow archers escape? Where did they go? Esteemed Wang Fei, did you recognize the black-robed assassin? Han Yunxi completely ignored them as she stared silently out the window. Gu's face was full of disdain as he assumed they were all good-for-nothings and good-for-nothings. Meanwhile, Long Feiyi was staring at Han Yunxi with an ugly expression. Chu Shifeng finally sensed something amiss and thought that something must have happened to the three of them. Otherwise, with His Highness's personality, he'd be in such a hurry to find them. He'd be holding them in his arms long ago. Everyone watched and waited, but the people involved remained silent. The mess of clothes on the ground and Gu's bare upper body made for an unsightly sight. Chu Shifeng wanted to break the silence, but Long Fei Yi only said in a cold voice, "Chu Shifeng, take Wang Fei back to the estate first." Before Chu Shifeng could even move, Han Yunxi had already headed outside. Gu Qishao grew anxious. Is this silly lass really going back inside? He hurried after her. With so many people around, it wasn't good to make a scene. Otherwise, Han Yunxi would be the subject of all sorts of rumors and slanders again. Chu Shifeng knew that His Highness Duke of Qin wouldn't easily let off anyone involved in the assassination attempt, but he was worried about His Highness's internal injuries. Your Highness, treating your injuries is more important. After reminding him in a low voice, he hurried after esteemed Wang Fei. But esteemed Wang Fei didn't return to the Duke of Qin's estate. Instead, she said, back to the Han estate. Chapter 491. Return to the Han estate. Chu Shifeng almost burst into tears at those words. He wanted to coax her, but didn't know how. He wanted to go back and tell His Highness Duke of Qin, but hesitated. Right now, the brothel was surrounded by a crowd of commoners, soldiers, and soldiers. Countless pairs of eyes were watching. If he failed to coax esteemed Wang Fei and angered her instead, she'd lose her temper in front of the gates. Wouldn't that be a joke? But if he went to tell His Highness Duke of Qin, who was on the verge of a breakdown, what if he lost control and rushed out to force esteemed Wang Fei to return to the estate? With Gu in the mix, they'd be nothing but a laughingstock. Rumors would spread like wildfire. Although Gu Qishao was heavily injured and wrapped up in white bandages, he still wasn't wearing a shirt. Of course, esteemed Wang Fei had saved him in a moment of desperation. That didn't count for much since he was only half naked. But this was a brothel. It was a very sensitive place. Now that Gu Qishao had walked out with esteemed Wang Fei, it was inevitable that people would be curious as to how he'd saved her, how long they'd been in the brothel, when the assassins had left, and why esteemed Wang Fei hadn't called for help yet, and so on. Once people started asking questions like these, they'd be filled with all sorts of suspicions that would turn into rumors. Chu Shifeng knew that the wisest choice right now was to make esteemed Wang Fei and Gu disappear from everyone's sight as soon as possible. Then he'd shift everyone's attention to the problem of capturing the assassins. After all, there was still no news of them. Chu Shifeng was about to make a decision when a commotion arose from the crowd. Qi Big Brother. Qi Big Brother, what's wrong? Qi Big Brother. Who hurt you? Qi Big Brother. Mu Linger struggled to get to the front of the crowd, but was stopped by the soldiers with their spears in the end. She'd heard that Han Yunxi was in trouble this morning at the inn, so she'd come to Smoke Alley to help search for her. After all, Han Yunxi had saved her once, so she had to repay her debt. Who would have thought that he would actually see Qi Brother, who was heavily injured and wrapped up in bandages? Others might not be able to tell, but as a genius in the medical field, she could tell at a glance that Qi Brother had suffered a terrible injury. If he was not injured in the back, he must have been injured in the front. Otherwise, no quack doctor would wrap him up like a dumpling. Gu and Han Yunxi were both surprised and turned to look at Mu Ling. Chu Shifeng was even more surprised. I'm finished. Now that Mu Ling was here, there was no lack of excitement. When she saw Gu looking at her, Mu Linger became even more anxious. She was so anxious that tears almost fell from her eyes. She threw caution to the wind and kicked away the soldiers who were blocking her as she dashed towards Gu. The officials on the side were furious. They were about to arrest her when a single look from Han Yunxi froze them in place. As soon as Mu Ling drew near, she saw that Gu's wound was on his back. The wound had been torn open and the blood hadn't stopped flowing. She circled around him, too flustered to know what to do. She'd waited and searched for him for so long, but now he was seriously injured. Gu ignored her and was about to urge Han Yunxi to leave, and Mu Ling suddenly lost her temper. Han Yunxi, it's you again. Silence fell upon the crowd at her words. Han Yunxi was completely disappointed. She didn't react to Mu Ling's yelling, but murmured to Gu, hurry and find Imperial Physician Gu to treat your wound. I owe you this time. What about the wound on your shoulder? Gu was still worried about that. Han Yunxi smiled and mimicked him with a proud expression. This old lady won't die. She prepared to leave as soon as she finished speaking, but Mu Ling blocked her way. Han Yunxi, just what happened? Speak clearly. How did Chi Big Brother get hurt like this? Mu Ling's first words had silenced the crowd, but her second brought whispers to the crowd. Chu Shifeng wished he could muffle the damned girl's mouth. But how could the impulsive and straightforward Mu Ling ever consider the consequences? She was very, very angry right now. Last time at the Sky Pit, she assumed that Chi Big Brother was interested in the poison beast, but after finding out about Han Yunxi's bet with the Medical Academy's third elder, she realized that Chi Big Brother was looking for the poison beast for Han Yunxi's sake. Chi Big Brother had suffered a lot in the snake den at the Sky Pit. This time, it was because of Han Yunxi again. When she recalled how Han Yunxi had said that she wasn't familiar with Chi Big Brother and didn't know where Chi Big Brother was, Mu Ling's rationality would have long been eaten by a dog. Once one's heart was tired, many things were easy to do. Han Yunxi remained silent. She circled around Mu Ling and prepared to leave. Mu Ling wanted to stop her, but Gu suddenly pulled Mu Ling into his arms and laughed out loud. Lass, esteemed Wang Fei rewarded me with 30,000 taels. How about I split half with you? What kind of play was he singing? Even Mu Ling was stunned, to say nothing of the crowd. Chi Big Brother, did you lose your mind because of the pain? What are you talking about? Your Chi Big Brother and I were playing in the building when I saw a man in black and esteemed Wang Fei being chased by an assassin. Esteemed Wang Fei said that as long as this old man saved her, she would reward me with 30,000 taels. Gu smiled and looked at Han Yunxi. Esteemed Wang Fei, although you helped me apply medicine, you can't miss out on a single tael of 30,000 taels. Han Yunxi looked at Gu's heartless smile and inexplicably felt like crying. She knew that this guy was protecting her reputation. He was the one who often teased her and spoke nonsense in front of everyone. He was also the one who belittled her. Okay, I won't miss out on a single tael of 30,000 taels. I'll ask His Highness Duke of Qin for it later. Han Yunxi replied loudly. Mu Ling wasn't an idiot. She knew that Chi Big Brother was spouting nonsense, but she wasn't smart enough to consider the consequences of such a public uproar. She was about to speak again when Gu tilted his head to look at her with a piercing gaze. In a low voice, he said, "Shut up." Mu Ling really did shut her mouth. Although the man she loved was holding her, she felt like he was a stranger to her. So unfamiliar that she was afraid. With Gu's explanation and his embrace of Mu Ling, both commoners and officials were all watching. What kind of rumors could there be? Chu Shifeng never expected things to take such a turn for the better. Thrilled, he shouted, "Su Donglin, escort esteemed Wang Fei back to the estate. Everyone else, keep searching." His Highness Duke of Qin said not to let a single assassin escape. Han Yunxi silently boarded the carriage. As soon as she sat down, she realized she'd forgotten her medical pouch, but she didn't go back to get it. Instead, she glanced upstairs and said, "Let's go." Chu Shifeng didn't know whether esteemed Wang Fei meant going back to the Duke of Qin's estate or the Han estate. He only hoped that Su Donglin could coax esteemed Wang Fei back to the Duke of Qin's estate. He didn't dare tarry and quickly went back upstairs. After all, His Highness's internal injuries were very serious, so he couldn't stop worrying. As soon as Han Yunxi left, Gu left with Mu Ling in his arms. Everyone's focus shifted to catching the assassins. After all, His Highness Duke of Qin was still in the brothel. Inside the brothel, Long Feiyi, Long Tianma, Mu Qingwu, and the rest were all gathered in a room. Many of them had asked Qin Wangfei about the whereabouts of the assassins, but she'd left without saying a word. Many of them were displeased with her decision. But none of them dared to show it, because everyone could see that His Highness Duke of Qin's expression was very ugly. Currently, Long Feiyi was sitting on the messy bed and cleaning up Han Yunxi's medical pouch. A few gauze, cotton swabs, and other small items had fallen onto the bed. He carefully inspected each item before placing them into the pouch. His movements were very, very slow, and he was as quiet as an abandoned person. Everyone present wanted to ask him about the assassin's whereabouts, but no one dared to rush him. A long while later, Long Fei finished packing up the medical pouch before rising to his feet. Gu Qisha lured the assassins away. Judging from the time the city gates closed, those archers should still be in the city. His voice suddenly turned cold. Search from house to house for your lordship. This soldier obeys. Mu Qingwu was the first to carry out his orders, followed by the crown prince. Everyone else left in a hurry as well, afraid that someone else would find the archers first. His Highness Duke of Qin was right. After esteemed Wang Fei's accident at the Gu estate, Mu Qingwu had ordered the city gates to be sealed as soon as he arrived. It was only after the gates were sealed that something happened in the fireworks district. This meant that the archers were still in the city. As long as they were sure they were still in the city, it was only a matter of time before they found them. Once everyone was gone, Long Feiyi ordered his guards, take care of the things on the bed. The guards were puzzled. What else was on the bed besides the quilt? But when they walked closer for a closer look, they discovered a large black robe and a pair of imitation gloves. The robe was covered in blood and looked frightening. Without a doubt, Gu had left them behind. Long Feiyi had hardly left the room when Chu Shifeng arrived. Where are they? Long Feiyi asked. This subordinate had Su Donglin send them back. Chu Shifeng really didn't dare to mention the Han estate at a time like this. Let's go back first. Long Feiyi murmured. He walked very slowly, one hand clutching his medical pouch while the other rested on his sword. Chu Shifeng's heart grew alarmed, but he didn't dare to make a sound. Long Feiyi climbed into the carriage and finally couldn't take it anymore. He leaned weakly against the pillow and closed his eyes. Once the carriage was far away, the two junior officials from the justice courts emerged from the building. Looks like we'll have to search for them ourselves. The Duke of Qin is in a hurry to go back and comfort that woman. How could he possibly go after the assassins? Don't you think His Highness Duke of Qin is acting strange today? Even if he's strange, it's none of our business. Hurry up and search, this case will fall into the hands of our justice courts. If we can't solve it then, we'll all suffer. They were almost at the Duke of Qin's estate when Chu Shifeng peeked into the carriage and saw the Duke of Qin hugging his medical pouch as if asleep. Chu Shifeng didn't dare to disturb him, but kept moving forward. He had no idea who was still in the brothel, but he knew that once news of His Highness Duke of Qin's injury spread, both the assassins and Emperor Tianhui would seize the chance to make trouble for him. Now that all 4 city gates were shut, the assassins could only hide and not escape. Let Emperor Tianhui search for them. His Highness had to treat his injuries first. Chu Shifeng was more concerned about whether esteemed Wang Fei had returned to the Duke of Qin's estate. He was apprehensive the entire way, but when he saw Su Donglin and the carriage at the gates, his heart finally settled back down. Unexpectedly, Su Donglin rushed over as soon as he saw him. Boss, esteemed Wang Fei went to the Han estate. I couldn't stop her, what do we do? Inside the carriage, Long Fei Ye's eyes flew open. Chapter 492. That woman went to the Han estate. Long Fei Ye's heart had finally calmed down, but now it flared up again. He told her to go back to the estate, but she went to the Han estate instead. What did she mean by that? Was she not planning to go back to the Duke of Qin's estate? Did she want to leave him? Long Fei Yi was so angry that his cold face seemed to be covered in a layer of frost. He emanated a frightening aura of danger and almost crushed the medical pouch in his hands. But he didn't say a word. Outside the carriage, Chu Shifeng was trembling with fear. He didn't know if His Highness had heard Su Donglin's words, but he still had to report it. After all, His Highness had left the task of escorting esteemed Wang Fei back to the estate to him. Chu Shifeng glared at Su Donglin a few times before gathering his courage to speak. But Long Fei Yi suddenly said coldly, "Why aren't you going in yet?" Frightened, Chu Shifeng quickly drove the carriage through a side door. As for whether His Highness was going to find someone, he didn't dare to ask. But somehow, he felt like His Highness would tell him something. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi went straight back to his quarters and shut the doors. He didn't say a thing. Zhao Mama, Bailey Mingxiang, and Su Xiaoyu blocked Chu Shifeng's way, but all three of them were concerned about different things. Where's esteemed Wang Fei? Didn't they say she was saved? Zhao Mama asked anxiously. Su Xiaoyu was curious. Guard Chu, did they save that pill fiend too? Bailey Mingxiang, on the other hand, was completely focused on His Highness Duke of Qin. She discovered that his complexion didn't seem very well and was rather pale. Chu Shifeng didn't answer a single question, but jumped out from between the three women and went straight to the Han estate. Although there were guards there to protect him, it was better for him to go personally. The assassins wouldn't dare to make a move now, but what if? Actually, Chu Shifeng wanted to tell esteemed Wang Fei that His Highness Duke of Qin had suffered serious internal injuries. Unfortunately, he didn't dare to speak too much about His Highness's affairs. At this moment, Han Yunxi was in the leisure cloud park of the Han family. After Madame Helian became the head of the household, she renovated the Han residence and rented out all the empty courtyards, leaving only 3 courtyards, one of which was reserved for Han Yunxi. Because Han Yunxi's courtyard in the Duke of Qin's mansion was called Leisurely Cloud Pavilion, she reversed the 2 characters Leisurely Cloud and named it Leisurely Cloud. Madame Helian and little Eve were standing guard at the door. Even now, they were still confused and had no idea what had happened. The Princess Consort had been saved, so why was she here? Madame Helian had already tried to persuade him several times. Helpless, she could only keep winking at little Eve, asking him to persuade him. Sis, open the door. Big sister, did His Highness Duke of Qin bully you? Sis, please open the door. Is begging you. Finally, Han Yunxi spoke up. 7th Madam, all of you should go and rest. I'm tired and want to sleep. Madame Helian had no choice but to leave with little Eve. After calming down, Han Yunxi finally exhaled. Unfortunately, her heart was still stifled. She hugged her knees and sat on the couch. Her head was heavy and in a mess. From the assassination attempt at the Gu estate to Gu Qishao saving her, to the betrayal of the imperial guards, to Gu Qishao taking her away, to Gu Qishao revealing his true face, to Gu Qishao's serious injuries, to Gu Qishao's urgent treatment, and then Long Fei's appearance. Everything had happened so quickly that she still hadn't recovered her senses. She only felt like she was in a dream. In her dream, Long Fei Yi had returned, but it wasn't a beautiful dream. She knew that Long Fei Yi would be angry if she shared a bed with Gu with her disheveled clothes. Anyone would be angry. But why didn't he listen to her explanation? He clearly knew that she had been attacked, didn't he? He clearly saw that she and Gu were both injured, didn't he? She had applied medicine for Gu with her disheveled clothes. She really deserved to die. But she was really anxious at that time and forgot. It wasn't intentional. As a doctor, she was anxious in the face of such a terrible injury. Besides, Gu was injured because of her. Why didn't Long Fei think about it? If it wasn't for Gu, would he have come back to collect the corpse? Right and wrong, scene after scene flashed through Han Yunqi's mind. However, the one that repeated the most was Long Fei Ye's disdainful sneer. Long Fei Ye, because I like you, I'm so proud that I can lower myself to the ground. But you can't look down on me like this. What kind of woman do you take me for? What kind of woman do you take me for? The more Han Yunqi thought, the more her head hurt. Gradually, she closed her eyes and fell to the side. She was so preoccupied with Gu's injuries and Long Fei Ye's anger that she forgot about the wound on her shoulder. Even now, she hadn't pulled out the arrow from her shoulder. The wound wasn't bleeding, but it was already inflamed. Her head hurt not only because she was vexed, but because she had a high fever. Yaw. The window was carefully pushed open as a furry little head poked out. It was none other than Lil Thing. When it saw that Mama Yunqi was asleep, it crept closer. But it quickly realized that something was wrong and was about to call for help when the white-robed man entered. Chi. Lil Thing cried out anxiously. Shoo, the white-robed man gently motioned for it to quiet down. Lil Thing really did quiet down and obediently jumped onto the windowsill to stand guard. Actually, it and the gentleman had found Mama Yunqi before His Highness Duke of Qin, but the gentleman hadn't shown himself. The white-robed man carefully straightened the curled-up figure on the bed and sat by her side. He gently touched her forehead and took her pulse. After giving her a small pill to make sure she wouldn't wake up, he began to inspect the wound on her shoulder. She'd worn 3 layers of clothing to hide the wound, but the arrow had sunk deep into her flesh. Only a small part of the arrowhead could be seen, hidden by her clothes. It was difficult to inspect without taking off her clothes, but he was a true gentleman. He didn't touch her, but covered her with the covers. He'd not only given her a fever medicine, but a sleeping pill as well. She'd have to sleep for at least a day before she woke up. No amount of pain would wake her up. Still, he was afraid that she'd be in pain, so his movements couldn't be any gentler. He carefully lifted up the hole in her clothes and examined it. It seemed impossible to see clearly, so he knelt on one knee by the bed and found a suitable angle to inspect it. He repeatedly adjusted the angle and checked over and over again until Lil Thing yawned by the window. His eyes remained focused and serious. Finally, he found the most suitable position. First, he used a magnet to pull out some of the bolts. Then, he quickly used his fingers and middle fingers to clamp the bolts. With a sudden pull, the 3-inch bolt was pulled out of the ground. Strangely, Han Yunqi's wound didn't spurt any blood, but only a little. After all, the arrow had been shot so deeply and for so long. Pulling it out would definitely cause a lot of blood. He cleaned up the bloodstains and sprinkled some medicine to stop the bleeding. This time, his movements were no longer slow. He quickly wrapped up the wound so it wouldn't bleed. After that, he sighed softly and touched her forehead again. Although he was reluctant to do so, he quickly let go of her hand. Her fever had already begun to recede, which was good. Only then did he rise to his feet, his legs numb from kneeling. He smiled helplessly, a gentle smile hidden beneath the white gauze covering his face. All that could be seen was his clear, handsome features filled with tenderness. He poured out a cup of water and placed it by the bed. After some hesitation, he took off his white gauze and wrapped up the arrow before placing it by the bed as well. If Han Yunshi woke up now, she'd definitely see his doting, helpless smile. It was the most gentle face in the world. Unfortunately, Han Yunshi was still asleep. Silly girl, the wound is so deep, you mustn't move around. He looked at her for a long time, long enough for Lil Thing to assume that he'd stay. But in the end, he turned to leave. Lil Thing finally realized that he wasn't wearing a mask, but it wasn't shocked. It had long known who he was. His scent was the cleanest in the world, and the faint scent of medicinal herbs was the best in the world. After leaving the room, he suddenly vanished into thin air. Lil Thing panicked and quickly leapt onto the roof. Fortunately, he was standing right there. Naturally, Lil Thing had to stay behind to protect Mama Yunshi, but it had something to tell the gentleman. It quickly scurried onto his shoulder and dug out a clot of congealed blood. Cheep cheep, cheep cheep. This was Gu's blood. It had long sensed that something was off about Gu, but never expected his blood to be so delicious. It didn't know what was wrong with the blood, nor could it tell that it was poisonous, but it made its mouth water as soon as it smelled it. It really was delicious. Seeing this, the white-robed man smiled and took out a clot of blood as well. You noticed it too. Lil Thing was stunned. Cheep cheep, cheep cheep. A poison Gu human with an undying body. That child from the medical academy, it really was him. The white-robed man's expression grew heavy. It was precisely because he'd discovered Gu's undying body that he hadn't made a move. If an undying poison Gu human couldn't protect her, who else in the world could? But was it a blessing or a curse to be friends with this ruthless poison Gu human who didn't care about the world? Sensing the approaching guards, the white-robed man set Lil Thing down and quickly vanished from sight. Lil Thing cradled the clot of blood and wanted to hide it from Mama Yunshi to see, but when it remembered that Mama Yunshi's skills were limited and she wouldn't be able to tell, it simply swallowed it whole. So delicious. Chu Shifeng and a few of his guards patrolled the area before vanishing back into the shadows. That very night, while the guards were still patrolling the area, Gu Qishao openly showed up with Lady Hellion. He was still dressed in his usual flirtatious red robes that hid the numerous wounds on his back. Aside from his slightly pale face, he looked just like a normal person. Lady Hellion had no idea what the truth was, but she'd heard rumors outside that Gu had saved esteemed Wang Fei. Thus, she treated Gu with extra courtesy. Sir Gu, esteemed Wang Fei's been shut up in her rooms ever since she arrived. She refuses to see anyone, Lady Hellion said anxiously. Gu was alarmed. Didn't anyone treat your wounds? Lady Hellion was startled as well. Wounds. Han Yunshi had been shot very deeply. Moreover, she'd taken off her clothes and put them back on after being shot, so the arrow was hidden beneath her clothes. It was impossible to tell unless one looked closely. Gu immediately realized what was going on and prepared to kick the door open, but Chu Shifeng suddenly appeared to block him. Gu, don't be so impudent. Chapter 493. Of course Gu knew there would be guards at the Han estate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come here so openly. He chuckled disdainfully. You think you can stop me? Gu, if you really have the skills, then go find those assassins. Stop stirring up trouble here. Chu Shifeng huffed. Gu laughed out loud. So you're saying that Long Fei doesn't have the skills to find those assassins? You're the one who doesn't have the skills. Chu Shifeng raged. So His Highness Duke of Qin has already found them. Gu feigned shock. Chu Shifeng couldn't beat him in words and drew his sword in a fit of rage. Gu's gaze turned cold before he kicked the weapon out of Chu Shifeng's hands. Poison Lass's injury hasn't been treated yet. This old man will deal with you later. Esteemed Wang Fei was injured. Untreated. Chu Shifeng grew anxious as well. He followed Gu to knock on the door, but there was no response. Han Yunxi could naturally hear Chu Shifeng and Gu's voices, but she didn't have time to pay them any attention. She was too busy inspecting the wound on her shoulder. It had to be said that the way the wound had been treated left her astonished. She'd been shot very deeply. The 3-inch bolt had practically sunk into her flesh, but the person who treated her wound had pulled out the arrow without even taking off her clothes. They hadn't even cut open the clothes around the wound. How had they done that? Han Yunxi quickly tore off the gauze and took off her clothes to get a better look at the wound. But the sight left her even more stunned. The person who'd pulled out the arrow hadn't stitched it up at all. More importantly, the wound hadn't worsened or bled out. How did they pull out the arrow? Han Yunxi muttered to herself. She suddenly realized that all the stitches she'd stitched up for Gu were too weak. Although the wound had stopped bleeding, it still felt like her flesh had been split open. Han Yunxi quickly rebandaged the wound before putting on her clothes. After she was done, she saw a bottle of medicinal powder and a crossbow wrapped in white gauze on the bedside table. This medicinal powder was actually the famous Guangning Yuji powder. It was a top-grade medicinal powder for blood coagulation and muscle growth. The Han family did not have such a good thing. She looked at the white gauze again. This gauze looked like a mask. There was no pattern at all. She couldn't recognize the head at the moment. Who was the person who treated her wound? Although her head was still a little heavy, it was not as dizzy and messy as it was during the day. Han Yunxi touched her forehead and felt that she had a high fever. Was she unconscious from the fever, or did someone deliberately drug her? Otherwise, with such a deep wound and the arrow being pulled out, it was impossible for her not to wake up. She looked at the white veil again and thought of that white-robed man. But, was that fellow's medical skills that good? His ability to treat wounds was not inferior to Gu Beiyue's. In the midst of her bewilderment, the door to the room was kicked open. Gu, Chu Shifeng, and Lady Hulian all rushed in. Han Yunxi gave a start. They were stunned as well. After knocking for so long, they wondered what had happened to this great aunt. Esteemed Wang Fei, how's your wound? Poison lass, have you treated your wound yet? Chu Shifeng and Gu were both anxious, but Lady Hulian's eyes were sharp enough to notice the object by the bed. Esteemed Wang Fei, you've treated your wound. With Lady Hulian's words, Han Yunxi was certain that the person who treated her wound wasn't a member of the Han family. A seed of doubt had been planted in her heart. She silently hid the white gauze and said, it's taken care of. The small wound is fine now. You can all leave. Gu examined the wound carefully and saw that it had been treated. Only then did he relax. Esteemed Wang Fei, you should return to the Duke of Qin's estate with this subordinate. His Highness has already gone back, Chu Shifeng urged. He did not dare to reveal that His Highness had suffered internal injuries, but he said that His Highness had already returned to the palace. The Princess Consort should have guessed that something had happened to His Highness. Otherwise, at this critical moment, His Highness would have searched for the assassins and would not have stayed in the palace. Unfortunately, Han Yunxi only pretended not to hear. 7th Madam, you and Guard Chu should both leave. She wasn't stupid, but too smart. With the city gates closed, the assassins wouldn't be able to escape. If she was the Long Fei Yi, she'd return to the estate to drink tea and sleep. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu had already escalated the situation to the point of endangering the capital. In that case, Emperor Tianhui should be the first to worry. The assassination and gunpowder cases were so close to each other that Emperor Tianhui had his own suspects. He'd rather kill the wrong person than the wrong person. Esteemed Wang Fei, you're only leaving Gu alone. Chu Shifeng suddenly broke into a cold, disdainful laugh. Esteemed Wang Fei and His Highness had fallen out because of Gu Qishao, but she still left him alone in a room with a single woman. Did this woman really not know how to avoid arousing suspicion, or was she really a fickle woman who wanted to have a foot in two boats? Seeing Chu Shifeng's expression, Han Yunxi felt unwell all over. Long Fei Yi was doubting her, and now this servant was doubting her as well. Do I need to explain to you what I do? She'd always done things her own way. Back in the medical academy, she'd refused to budge even when the academy head and board of directors threatened her. Ever since she was young, she'd lived 2 lifetimes, but she'd never taken the initiative to explain herself to anyone except Long Fei Yi. But Long Fei Yi would never listen to her explanations. If not for the fact that she held the title of Qin Wangfei and was afraid of tarnishing it, why would she care about the rules and etiquette of this world? Why were there so many rumors and slanders? She, Han Yunxi, would never give face to anyone, much less this world. Chu Shifeng fell silent. This subordinate has overstepped his bounds. Esteemed Wangfei, please forgive me. Scram! Han Yunxi said bluntly. Chu Shifeng was both angry and aggrieved as he turned to leave. Lady Hellion glanced at Gu and hesitated to coax him, but Han Yunxi turned to cold water and said, "Seventh madam, you should leave too." Helpless, Lady Hellion could only silently withdraw from the room. As soon as she was outside, she chased after Chu Shifeng to put in a good word for esteemed Wang Fei. Perhaps esteemed Wang Fei had left Gu Qishao behind for business, but Chu Shifeng was long gone by the time she ran after him. Heaven knows if Chu Shifeng would complain to the Duke of Qin. Meanwhile, Han Yunxi had left Gu alone in the room because she had business to discuss. "Have you taken care of the injury on your back?" Han Yunxi asked. "Mu Ling has taken care of it, don't worry." Gu would never seek out Gu Beiyue. What if that guy picked up on some clues? Actually, he hadn't sought out Mu Ling at all. Once the bleeding reached a certain point, it would stop on its own, so he was too lazy to treat it. Mu Ling had long been poisoned by him and was now sleeping in the inn. Han Yunxi was relieved to see that Gu seemed to be in good spirits. She sat down and fell silent for a while before speaking. Gu Qishao, how should I address you?" She'd remembered the favor of saving her life, but she still had to pay for his deceit. Gu could guess that Han Yunxi had asked him to stay because of that. He grinned as he sat down. Chi big brother would be the best. Han Yunxi was in no mood to joke around. She said coldly, "You're investigating my origins too. Why did you bring me to Mute Granny? Why did you fall out with Medical City? Are your poison skills related to the poison sect?" Gu laughed heartily. "Girl, don't you get tired of thinking so much? Answer my question." Han Yunxi said seriously. "Hey, Chi big brother, let me tell you something. Before Chi big brother met you, he already had 2 identities. The medical academy will keep an eye on Gu Qishao, but not on Gu, understand? This is Chi big brother's own secret," Gu said with a smile. Han Yunxi understood. Everyone had their own secrets and there was no need to explain them to anyone. Just like the secret of her transmigration and the secret of her detoxification space, there was no need to tell anyone. She didn't want to pursue these questions, but there was one thing she had to clarify. "Why are you investigating my origins?" she asked sternly. From the time this fellow started to pay attention to her poison skills, to the Tang sect's hidden weapons, to the embroidered words on her medical bag, to investigating Madame Tianxin, to finding Mute Granny from the Mu family. All of this was to investigate her background. Don't think that just because he's always joking around, she'll take him for a fool. This guy still doesn't know that her biological father isn't Hong Kongan, but a descendant of the poison sect. When he first brought her to Mute Granny, he was already suspicious of her relationship with the poison sect. The reason he'd noticed her at first was probably because he suspected that her poison skills were related to the poison sect. Han Yunxi had asked him why he was looking for a descendant of the poison sect. He'd joked, as a catalyst to refine an antidote. She'd even asked him what kind of poison he'd been afflicted with, and he'd said, the most poisonous poison in the world. Han Yunxi didn't believe his joke, but she firmly believed that this guy had a motive for getting close to her. This time, Gu wasn't smiling. Instead, he wore a rare expression of seriousness, but he didn't answer Han Yunxi's question. Instead, he said seriously, "Poison lass, trust me. No matter what I do, I won't harm you." Is he trying to brush me off? Han Yunxi was clearly angry, but when she saw Gu's stubborn and sincere gaze, she couldn't bring herself to question him. She was afraid that she'd hurt his heart. Just yesterday, he'd risked his life to save her. What reason did she have to not trust him? Han Yunxi was silent for a long time before she said, "I believe you. But I have the right to know the truth, don't I?" She'd inherited everything from this identity, but she still didn't know the secret behind it. She really was a failure. When he saw Han Yunxi's stubborn and sincere gaze, Gu Qisha suddenly laughed. "Poison lass, you're not the person I'm looking for. This matter has nothing to do with you. You have no right to know." He'd been investigating all this time, looking for the descendants of the poison sect. Ever since Poison Woman and Mute Granny had been imprisoned, all his leads had been cut off. So far, this woman in front of him was the biggest suspect. However, his words today weren't just brushing her off, nor were they a lie. He hadn't just said it for Han Yunxi's benefit, but for himself as well. His poison lass wasn't the person he was looking for. She definitely wasn't. Even if she was, he'd pretend that she wasn't. He had plenty of ways to take revenge on Medical City, but as for the antidote, her existence, every smile, every frown, every word was the best medicine for him. Antidote my ass. It's fine if you don't understand. Han Yunxi was skeptical, but she couldn't refute Gu. He was right, she had no right to know anything that had nothing to do with her. Gu Qishao rose to his feet and stretched lazily. "Poison lass, Chi Gij likes to joke around, but I've never lied." He turned to leave, but when he reached the door, he turned back and added, "That's right, Poison lass, Chi brother really didn't hide the antidote for the broomcorn millet poison." Chapter 494. He didn't keep the 10% antidote for himself. What did he mean? If he didn't keep it, where did the antidote go? Han Yunxi's other reason for keeping Gu Qishao here was to ask him who he'd sold the antidote to back then. Who knew that Gu Qishao would leave her with such a line? "Gu Qishao, wait." Han Yunxi chased after him, but Gu Qishao was already nowhere to be seen. She stood at the door in a daze. Her fever and sleeping pills had just subsided, but her head was still a little heavy. She tried to recall what happened with the antidote, but soon her head started to throb. Back at Pill Fiend Valley, she'd used the serpent fruit to calculate the true amount of antidote. Meanwhile, Gu Qishao had used useless medicinal powders to mix with the antidote, causing the inside of the bottle to turn black. This proved that he'd given Long Fei a full bottle. At that time, she didn't think too much about it and immediately assumed that the inner wall of the bottle that Gu had given her was completely black, thus denying Gu's evidence. If Gu had mixed the fake antidote, then so be it. Why did he choose the fake antidote that would react with the porcelain bottle? Why did he have a trick up his sleeve? At that time, she had also thought about this question, but she didn't think too much about it. She just thought that Gu had left this trick up his sleeve so that he could cheat them of the antidote. To be honest, although she had been so serious about the quantity, she didn't want to prove anything. She just wanted to deny Gu. Because before she went to the Medicine Ghost Valley, she had already denied Gu completely. She couldn't possibly doubt her own husband and trust someone who had mixed the fake antidote to cheat them. But what about now? The person who had mixed the fake antidote to cheat them was Gu. It was Gu who had brought her to find Mute Granny. Therefore, Gu had no reason to kidnap Mute Granny and secretly hide the 10% antidote from Mute Granny. 10% of the antidote was just enough to cure the broomcorn millet poison once. If it wasn't Gu, then who had the 10% antidote? What was he going to do with it? Han Yunxi suddenly realized that she was afraid. She didn't dare to think further, nor was she willing to think further. Now it seemed that Gu had purposely used the ineffective powder to blacken the inner wall of the porcelain. Did that guy know something? Gu! Come out! Gu, I know you're here. Come out and explain yourself. Gu! Han Yunxi chased him to the courtyard and shouted desperately. Unfortunately, this time, Gu really left. No one responded to her for a long time. Can I pretend to be stupid? Can you pretend you don't know anything? Han Yunxi asked herself in her heart. She had never been a timid person, but this was the first time she felt scared. If the Long Fei Yi had lied to her, then what was the purpose of the Long Fei Yi? She felt like she needed to calm down. She didn't dare to think any further and weakly turned around, only to see a familiar figure standing in front of her door. That tall and proud figure, that cold and stern face, was him, Long Fei Yi. Your Highness, as if out of habit, she couldn't help but call out his name. But as soon as she opened her mouth, she stopped abruptly and chose to remain silent. Long Fei Yi looked at her in silence as well. Dressed in black robes, he emanated a merciless air. The two of them were less than 10 steps apart, but it felt like they were separated by centuries. When you were born, I wasn't. When I was born, you were already old. Time was the greatest distance. Long Fei Yi, if I hadn't transmigrated here, would you have grown old in my world and become history? Would I not be so sad then? Long Fei Yi didn't speak. Han Yunxi's mind was a mess, and her heart was even more confused. She needed to calm down. She turned to leave, but Long Fei Yi suddenly said coldly, "You're looking for Gu." So Chu Shifeng went back to complain. Thus, it took him an entire day and night to find his way here because of Gu Qishao. She'd realized she'd left her medical pouch outside the brothel, but purposely didn't go upstairs to get it. Hadn't she left it there for him? She'd left him with a reason to find her. She knew he'd check the room and find the pouch. But he'd only come now because Chu Shifeng had complained. Han Yunxi's heart grew cold. She didn't answer, but turned to leave. Long Fei Yi flew over to block her way. You still haven't answered your lordship's question. Han Yunxi took a deep breath and bowed respectfully. Yes, I'm looking for him. May I ask if your Highness Duke of Qin has any other business? Her reverence was an eyesore to Long Fei Yi. What, you can't bear for him to leave? It looks like your lordship came at the wrong time, he laughed coldly. Han Yunxi's eyes began to sting, but she stubbornly held them back. She gave him a provocative look. Yes. Han Yunxi. Long Fei Yi flew into a rage. He pressed down on her shoulder and gripped it so tightly that he almost crushed it. At this moment, Lady Hellion arrived. Seeing the situation, she cried out in fright, Your Highness Duke of Qin, please have mercy. Your Highness Duke of Qin, esteemed Wang Fei's shoulder is injured, you can't. You can't. Long Fei Yi finally remembered that he'd seen her shoulder injured at the brothel. He abruptly released her, but it was already too late. Fresh blood seeped out from her bandages and clothes to stain his hands. He stared blankly at his bloodied hands, then at Han Yunxi's pale, stubborn face. His heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. He was about to apologize when Han Yunxi smiled, her dimples as beautiful as a flower. Long Fei Yi, everyone can see my injury. You're the only one who hasn't seen it since last night. She said, Your Highness Duke of Qin, if there's nothing else, please do as you please. I'm still in a rush to find Qi brother. Qi brother. Long Fei Ye's entire being emanated a terrifying killing intent. His bloodied hands slowly clenched into fists that crackled as if ready to punch her at any moment. Lady Hellion was scared witless. She gaped and couldn't speak. Han Yunxi's shoulder hurt like hell, but it couldn't compare to the pain in her heart. She didn't say anything else, nor did she want to ask about broomcorn millet poison. She curtsied and turned to leave. Long Fei Yi narrowed his eyes at her retreating form. She was already far away, but he didn't move. It wasn't until Chu Shifeng found him that he recovered his wits. Your Highness, this subordinate, Chu Shifeng didn't know what to say. He wanted to go back and complain, but he couldn't find His Highness anywhere in the Duke of Qin's estate. He had no choice but to turn back, only to find His Highness at the Han estate. Before Chu Shifeng could figure out the situation, Long Fei had already turned to leave. The hand behind his back had been clutching a medical pouch. If it wasn't Han Yunxi's, who else could it be? Guard Chu, did you complain to the Emperor? Which servant doesn't want the best for their master? It's fine if you don't try to mediate, but you even added oil to the fire. What are your intentions? Yunxi definitely isn't that kind of person. She must have something to discuss with Sir Gu. I'm telling you now, His Highness won't forgive you easily once they make up. Lady Hellion warned angrily. Chu Shifeng felt wronged. I didn't say anything. I've just found His Highness. Then why are they arguing again? Lady Hellion huffed. Go ask your family's great-aunt. Chu Shifeng was filled with grievances and anger as well. He couldn't care less about that now, but he should hurry and chase after His Highness. Who cared if that ignorant woman lived or died? His Highness's health was more important. He'd need 2 or 3 days of closed-door cultivation to treat his internal injuries, or else he wouldn't be able to hold on. With everyone gone, the Han estate resumed its silence. Han Yunxi hid in the medicine room and treated her own wounds. They were very deep to begin with, but Long Fei Ye's pinch had wasted all of her previous efforts. Fresh blood kept flowing out. She used the bottle of medicine left behind by the white-robed gentleman and the Han estate's own medicine to stop the bleeding. Fortunately, the effects were good. After bandaging the wound, she was exhausted and weak. She lay paralyzed in the pile of medicine, unwilling to move. Her head hurt, so she didn't want to think too much. But Mute Granny's incident, Gu's reminder, and Mu Ling's curses kept popping up in her head. As she thought about it, she didn't know why she fell asleep in the end. Lil Thing popped out from the side and looked at Mama Yunxi's injuries with heartache. It had been hiding on the side, itching to bite His Highness Duke of Qin to death. But in the end, it didn't dare. It knew that Mama Yunxi couldn't bear to part with him. It could only obediently curl up by her side. It really wanted the gentleman to take Mama Yunxi away. The gentleman was the last person in the world who'd hurt her. The night was still quiet. All of the capital city was brightly lit, and the imperial guards were still searching for assassins from house to house. How many people could sleep peacefully? Not far from the Han estate's medicine room, Gu was lying on a roof with his hands behind his head as he stared at the stars. As he stared, he began to mutter to himself, Qi, be good. Qi, be good. When he was young, his father must have coaxed him to sleep like this. It had been a long time since he thought about his childhood, but Poison Lass's questions today made him recall his childhood. He'd already forgotten how old he was back then, only that he was like a wild child who liked to roll up his sleeves and pants and run around the mountain forests behind the medical academy barefoot. Every time his father found him, he'd carry him high up in his arms and ride him on his neck all the way home from hiding in the woods. Back then, he had a strange illness that made it difficult for him to fall asleep. No matter how tired he was from playing during the day, he needed someone to coax him to sleep at night. His father would hold him and call out softly, "Chee, be good. Chee, be good. Chee, be good. Chee, be good. Chee, be good." But one day, his father suddenly handed him over to the head elder of the medical academy and told him, "Chee has been afflicted with a demonic illness and needs to be adopted by the head elder. In the future, he can only follow the head elder and take medicine every day." His father explained a lot, but Chee didn't understand. Later, he learned that his father was the head of the medical academy and that his reputation was very important. He didn't allow illegitimate children to exist, and his hidden home in the mountains was forbidden to the public because it was a forbidden area of the poison sect. From then on, he became the head elder's adopted son. From then on, he never saw his father again. It was also from then on that he began to take medicine every day for 3 meals. Every time he was about to vomit, his adopted father would tell him that he only had to obediently take his medicine and stay alive to see his father again. He wanted to see his father because he didn't have a mother. He only had one father from the time he could remember. Suddenly, there was a loud bang that shook the entire capital. Goose snapped out of his daze and shot to his feet. Where did that explosion come from? What happened? Chapter 495. In the middle of the night, a huge explosion shook the entire capital city. Goo jumped to his feet. He didn't know where the gunpowder had come from, but when he saw that the Han estate was fine, he lay back down. He'd never been a curious man, nor did he have the leisure to meddle in other people's business. Whether it was the chaos in Tianning's capital city, Tianning country, or Cloud Realm continent itself, none of it had anything to do with him. His childhood memories had been interrupted, so they wouldn't continue. Aside from his nightmares, he'd never think of them when he was awake. He stared at the stars in the sky, which were reflected in his clear and bright eyes. His world had quieted down, but Tianning country had begun an era of turmoil with this loud boom. Han Yunxi was startled awake from her deep sleep. At first, she thought she'd had a nightmare, but when she heard the commotion outside, she knew something big had happened. The explosion was so loud that even the houses in the capital city shook. Without a doubt, the explosion had happened near the capital, or even within it. Even the explosion at Sky Domain Black Market had caused panic in the capital, to say nothing of an explosion so close by. Han Yunxi hurried out the door and discovered that everyone in the Han estate had been startled awake. The streets outside were noisy as well. Su Donglin, come out. Han Yunxi shouted. She knew there were guards around. As expected, Su Donglin immediately appeared. Esteemed Wang Fei, you weren't scared, were you? Why don't we go back to the estate? It's safe there. What's going on? Han Yunxi asked seriously. I'm not sure either. His Highness ordered me to guard the place at all times. Su Donglin was obviously lying. With his position in the Shadow Guards, he didn't even have the right to speak with His Highness Duke of Qin. Han Yunxi didn't have time to expose his lies. She said anxiously, this is a very serious matter. Hurry and go to the Duke of Qin's estate to see what's going on with His Highness. Find out where the explosion happened. Su Donglin grew anxious as well. He ordered the other guards to keep watch and left immediately. Where did the gunpowder come from? Han Yunxi frowned and pondered. She was really afraid that the whole city search would drive the Chu family into a corner, and they would use the gunpowder case to bite back at Long Fei. Other than General Mu's residents, only the Chu clan had gunpowder in their hands. At this time, Long Fei had just returned to the Duke of Qin's residence and was also shocked by this matter. Your Highness, it's not far from the armory on the western outskirts of the city. The secret guard immediately investigated. Armory. Interesting. Long Fei's eyes flashed with a complicated light. After a moment of silence, he ordered, "Tell Chu Shifeng that your lordship is going into closed-door cultivation for 2 days. Send more people to keep an eye on the Han family." After he finished speaking, he entered the palace and did not mention a single word about the explosion just now. Does His Highness Duke of Qin have no opinion on such an important matter? The guard was curious, but didn't dare to ask. He quickly went to find Chu Shifeng. The entire capital city was brightly lit by lanterns. Both the common people and the imperial family were panicking, but Emperor Tianhui was the most panicked of all. He was in the imperial study asking General Mu and Mu Qingwu about the betrayal of the imperial guards when the sudden explosion caused the teacup in his hands to shatter on the floor. General Mu promptly sent someone to investigate. At this moment, everyone in the room was silent. Emperor Tianhui sat upright and still, his hands clutching the armrests of his chair. His cold face was tense and solemn. Since the explosion, he had allowed General Mu to send people to investigate without saying a word. In front of him, Crown Prince Long Tianma, General Mu, and Mu Qingwu all had their heads bowed, their expressions ghastly. Leaving aside the question of who was behind the explosion, Mu Qingwu, the commander of the Imperial Guards and the heavy responsibility of protecting the capital and the Imperial Palace, would be hard-pressed to escape blame. Moreover, Emperor Tianhui had just reprimanded Mu Qingwu over the betrayal of the Imperial Guards before the explosion. Now that such a thing had happened at such a sensitive time, how could Emperor Tianhui not investigate Mu Qingwu's negligence of duty? In the silent room, Emperor Tianhui's breathing was heavy. Long Tianma and the Mu family were both on tenterhooks and on tenterhooks. The guards hadn't returned yet, so it was unclear what the situation was. Who wouldn't be nervous? Of course, Long Tianma was the most anxious of all. He was feeling uneasy. Over the past 2 to 3 days, he and Mu Qingwu had put in plenty of effort to convince the emperor that the crossbow archers had something to do with the black market gunpowder case. Both of them were a threat to the capital. But someone had whispered something into the emperor's ears, causing him to summon the Mu family to the palace that very night to ask about the betrayal of the Imperial Guards. Everyone knew that the young commander of the Imperial Guards had been stabbed to death by Mu Qingwu in a moment of desperation, while the 2 captains had been imprisoned and interrogated. But who would have time to pay attention to such details when the city was still searching for the crossbow archers? The emperor had only asked once before, then told them to use torture to interrogate them. After that, he'd stopped asking. But tonight, he suddenly wanted to ask for more details. Then there was the sudden discovery of the explosion. Wasn't all of this too much of a coincidence? Suddenly, a rush of footsteps broke the silence of the imperial study. The guards who'd gone out to investigate had returned. In a flash, the tense crowd grew even more tense. Just what was the situation? Eunuch Luo hadn't even brought him in before Emperor Tianhui couldn't take it anymore. Where was the explosion? Just what happened? To reply, Your Majesty, it was the military depot on the western outskirts that exploded. The explosion destroyed 2 storehouses full of weapons. We're still counting the casualties, and the military doctors have all rushed back. At these words, Long Tianma, Mu Qingwu, and General Mu all looked up at the same time, their faces pale with shock. The military depot exploded. How could this be? The depot on the western side of the city belonged to the Imperial Guards under General Mu's command. It was a large storehouse for weapons, an important location that was heavily guarded. How could something like an explosion happen there? Moreover, there were no explosives stored there at all. In Tianning's 3 countries, gunpowder was all in the hands of the military. Tianning country's gunpowder was controlled by General Mu's estate because it was precious and limited in quantity. Unless there was a major war, it was rarely used. Even the cavalry and naval forces could only be transferred from General Mu's estate if needed. Emperor Tianhui looked icily at General Mu, his hawk-like eyes filled with anger and suspicion. Imperial father, these people are too audacious. They dared to challenge our Tianning's military might. As it can seize it. Before long Tianma could finish, Emperor Tianhui cut him off angrily. General Mu, why would the military depot explode for no reason? Where did the gunpowder come from? Tianning's gunpowder storehouses were scattered all over the country, while the capital's was located on the eastern outskirts of the city. Without Emperor Tianhui's permission, even General Mu couldn't use it. Where did the gunpowder in the armory come from? Did someone do it on purpose, or was there a secret stash of gunpowder in the depot that accidentally ignited it? It was hard to say. Imperial father, it must be those people from the black market. They're probably trying to create panic and divert attention so those archers have a chance to escape. Those people must be accomplices. Imperial father, Tianning's gunpowder controls are so strict. I'm afraid the gunpowder was smuggled in by a foreign power. Long Tianma explained anxiously. Although he didn't specify which country the foreign power was from, a smart person would know without thinking. Such a sensitive matter could only be muddled through trade at the border. Northern Li and Tianning didn't have any trade, but Western Zhou and Tianning did. Unfortunately, Emperor Tianhui didn't even spare him a glance. Seeing this, Mu Qingwu grew anxious as well. He was about to speak when General Mu silenced him with a look. In the end, the Crown Prince and the young general were still too inexperienced. Since the Emperor had summoned them to ask about the betrayal of the Imperial Guards, it meant he was already suspicious of them. If they pointed the spear at the Chu clan like before, it would only make the Emperor feel disgusted and suspicious. General Mu stepped forward and fell to his knees. Your Majesty, this soldier is guilty. Seeing this, Mu Qingwu followed suit. Long Tianma's eyes flashed with a complicated look, but he didn't dare to speak. Your Majesty, this soldier neglected his duties and allowed the assassins to run amok. The people's hearts were in a state of panic, and I know it's difficult to escape punishment. Whether or not the military depot was secretly stashed with gunpowder to cause the explosion, or whether or not someone else brought gunpowder to cause trouble remains to be investigated. But no matter what, this soldier is guilty of failing to supervise and protect the depot. These 2 crimes are heinous and unpardonable. May your Majesty meet punishment. His words sounded like an apology, but he was tactfully explaining the 2 reasons for the explosion. Emperor Tianhui's anger faded a little, but he still gave a cold snort. So you know you're guilty too. General Mu kowtowed on the ground, not daring to speak. On the side, Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu were even more afraid to speak. Emperor Tianhui clenched his fists and slammed them against the table. After a long silence, he said, Jin will give you 3 days to investigate this matter clearly. Otherwise, don't think Jin won't touch you just because you've been an official for 2 dynasties. Thanks to your Majesty for your grace. General Mu thanked him repeatedly. Mu Qingwu, we will also give you 3 days. If you can't catch those crossbowmen by then, I'll give you 3 days. If you can't catch those archers, then you can go accompany your 2 subordinates in prison. Emperor Tianhui said coldly. This soldier obeys. Mu Qingwu was even more afraid to speak. After the 3 of them left the imperial study, they exchanged glances. None of them dared to discuss the matter. It wasn't until they were far enough away that Long Tianma lost his temper. Young general, just what's going on with the defection? Don't tell this crown prince you didn't know. If it wasn't for the defection, how could the emperor have raised suspicions for no reason? Mu Qingwu's gaze was still evasive, but General Mu was serious. Your Highness Crown Prince, the 2 captains of the Imperial Guard are still locked up in the prisons. There's plenty of people who'd like to take advantage of the situation to hit them while they're down. It's inevitable that His Majesty would be suspicious. It's Qingwu's fault for being impulsive. He shouldn't have killed that commander. Since General Mu had already said as much, what else could Long Tianma pursue? He sighed heavily. Right now, the most important thing is to find evidence. As long as we can prove that the military depot didn't have any hidden gunpowder, this crown prince refuses to believe that Imperial Father will sit still. They even dared to touch the military depot. Those people must be tired of living. It was easy enough to prove that the explosion wasn't caused by the secret stash of gunpowder. The military depot was heavily guarded and filled with people trained by General Mu himself. There was no way they betrayed General Mu, so General Mu was confident that the explosion had occurred outside of the depot. As long as they could find the source of the explosion, the Crown Prince could continue to nip at the Chu clan. For General Mu, who'd been in charge of the gunpowder depot for many years, finding the source of the explosion was easy. But while General Mu and the other 2 split up, a woman in the Eastern Palace grew frantic. She was none other than Mu Luiyue. What had she done? Chapter 496. At this time, everyone in the palace was in a state of panic because of the explosion. However, Mu Luiyue was more anxious than anyone else. When she first married into the Eastern Palace, she often paced back and forth at the palace gates in the middle of the night, hoping that her husband would return. Later on, she waited until she lost all hope and never waited again. However, tonight, she was pacing back and forth at the palace gates again. She was waiting for the old nanny who had been sent out to scout for information. Why would the well-trained and disciplined imperial army betray the emperor? Why would Mu Qingwu be so rash as to kill that young commander? Why would Mu Qingwu avoid the crown prince's questions? It was because that young commander had been promoted from the Mu family's army to the imperial army. When he was in the Mu family's army, he was often ordered around by Mu Luiyue. Even if he was punished several times, he was still willing to endure. It was because he liked eldest Miss Mu. He was loyal to General Mu's household, but his betrayal was ordered by Mu Luiyue. As the saying goes, even heroes have a weakness for the charms of a beautiful woman and femme fatale. Even the imperial army couldn't kill Han Yunxi. How could Mu Luiyue not be anxious? She was waiting for the results of this explosion. The entire palace was noisy. Everyone was discussing tonight's explosion. Only the Eastern Palace was extremely quiet. Not long after Mu Luiyue married into the Eastern Palace, the Crown Prince no longer lived in the Eastern Palace. Unless he came back occasionally, he would not be seen most of the time. Most of the servants in the Eastern Palace were also removed. In a sense, this place was a cold palace. Mu Luiyue was about to go crazy from waiting in this empty silence. Finally, the old nanny returned. Mu Luiyue rushed over and hugged her. How is it? How is it? Is that slut dead? Unexpectedly, the old nanny was about to cry. Your Highness. We were deceived. Deceived? What do you mean by deceived? I'm asking you if that bitch Han Yunxi is dead or not. Mu Luiyue was completely blinded by hatred. She was so anxious that she flew into a rage. Your Highness, it was our armory that exploded. Just now, His Majesty was furious and wanted to punish old general and young general. He ordered them to investigate everything within 3 days, otherwise. The old nanny couldn't continue. She had tried to persuade Her Highness to cooperate with noble Consort Chu back then. Unfortunately, she hadn't been able to persuade her. Now, the imperial concubine had been bewitched and had been completely used by noble Consort Chu. What? Mu Luiyue was dumbfounded. After a while, she grabbed the old mama's shoulder and shook it hard. What did you say? Say it again. Your Highness, it was our armory that exploded. It wasn't the Duke of Qin's residence that exploded. How could this be? Did you hear it wrong? Mu Luiyue's face turned pale. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. It can't be wrong. Your Highness, what do we do now? The old mama was scared out of her wits. She was worried about the great general and young general situation, but Mu Luiyue was more concerned about Han Yunxi's life or death. How could she know the severity of the black market gunpowder case? How could she have the skills to see the current situation clearly? In her childish mind, her father was so powerful that what could the emperor do to the Mu family if something happened to the armory? Not long after the black market explosion, Chu Qingge had come to find her to discuss murdering Han Yunxi. Chu Qingge had said that it was better to kill a bitch like Han Yunxi by the roots than to plot against her. She agreed with Chu Qingge's ideas too much and gave her plenty of suggestions, but Chu Qingge had rejected all of them. In the end, Chu Qingge had brought up Duan Muyao, saying that she was His Highness Duke of Qin's junior sister and had ways to lure him away. As long as he wasn't present, it would be easy to kill Han Yunxi. Chu Qingge had said that the imperial guards were only spares that would be used as a last resort. Moreover, she'd make sure nothing went wrong and silence the witnesses. She wouldn't blow the matter up. Everything had gone according to plan, but who knew that her big brother would rush back as soon as he returned to the city? By the time His Highness Duke of Qin found Han Yunxi on his way back, Chu Qingge had found her again and said that Han Yunxi had gone to the Han estate. She was plotting a plot to blow up the Han estate. First, she could kill Han Yunxi with the explosion. Second, she could smear the black market gunpowder case on the Han family and accuse them of hiding gunpowder for themselves. Chu Qingge had said that the gunpowder was outside the city. Now that the gates were all shut, it would be difficult to get in. She needed the Mu family's command token. The Mu family's command token was her proof of entry into the army barracks. Her father and older brothers were both soldiers, so she'd spend a lot of time in and out of the barracks. Naturally, she had her own token. The guards at the gates were the Imperial Guards. With her command token, it was possible for them to make things easier for her. She was afraid that the guards wouldn't agree, so she'd given them both a token and a token. Now it looked like Chu Qingge hadn't used the token or token to smuggle the gunpowder into the city, but had taken them to the military depot instead. Esteemed Wang Fei, noble Consort Chu isn't at ease. She wants to harm General Mu's estate and the Eastern Palace. We've committed a heinous crime, so what should we do? The old mama sobbed. What are you crying for? My father's there to protect her. We won't die. Mu Luiyue rebuked. She narrowed her eyes and tried to hold back her tears, but in the end, she couldn't. Chu Qingge. You slut. I'm going to kill you. Mu Luiyue angrily shouted. The old mama was frightened and hurriedly hugged her. Nyang Nyang, be careful. His Majesty doesn't know anything yet. If someone hears you shouting like that, it'll be over. Esteemed Wang Fei, this old servant will leave the palace and find the general right now. Mu Luiyue finally calmed down. Hurry and go. When you see my father, tell him I know my wrongs. She thought for a long time before adding, tell him I was so guilty that I wanted to hang myself, but you persuaded me not to. Tell him it's inconvenient for me to leave the palace and ask for his forgiveness, but I'll definitely kowtow to him once I leave. Esteemed Wang Fei, don't worry. This old servant will definitely put in a good word for you. The old mama didn't dare delay and left in a hurry. Mu Luiyue was depressed to death. Now that she'd calmed down, she regretted it all. Currently, Chu Qingge was in an even worse situation than her. Mu Luiyue had father and brother who doted on her and allowed her to do as she pleased. Chu Qingge, on the other hand, had ambitious father and brother who wanted her to sacrifice herself. By the time she heard the explosion, Chu Qingge had already finished bathing and was dressed in Emperor Tianhui's favorite white muslin lantern dress. Currently, she was sitting on the bed hugging her knees, her eyes empty and lifeless. She was very clear on her brother's plans and knew that she wouldn't be able to escape tonight. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what if. What if His Highness Duke of Qin liked her? If His Highness Duke of Qin had liked her, then wouldn't everything have been different today? Wouldn't she have ended up like this? Without all those schemes and machinations, without all the humiliation, and without all the envy and jealousy, she would still be as pure as ice and pure as jade, proud and noble as before. What if His Highness Duke of Qin liked her? Who would dare to force her into this state? Long Fei Yi, if there's a next life, will you like me? Finally, a court lady rushed in with a secret missive. Chu Qingge opened it and glanced at it before burning it. She wrapped herself in a loose robe and hugged herself for a long time before getting off the bed and putting on her shoes. Someone come, arrange a carriage to Profound Dragon Palace. The black stone gunpowder case had thoroughly infuriated her brother. He'd wanted to take Han Yunxi as a hostage to threaten His Highness Duke of Qin, but who knew the assassination would turn out like this? Her brother said that there was no stopping things at this point. He had to use this chance to get rid of the Crown Prince's wings, the Mu family. Thus, it was time for her to make a sacrifice. She'd been married to Tianning for a while now. Although Emperor Tianhui wasn't feeling well, how could he stop her if she wanted to? Since her brother had sent her a secret missive, Eunuch Luo must have already made arrangements at Profound Dragon Palace. Chu Qingge rode a sedan chair to the gates of Profound Dragon Palace and saw Eunuch Luo waiting outside. Esteemed Wang Fei, His Majesty just came from the imperial study. Things are progressing smoothly. Inside the rooms, everything's been arranged as well, Eunuch Luo said, covering his mouth with a smile. His smile was an eyesore to Chu Qingge, but she remained calm. Since she'd already come this far, her heart should be as still as water and as dead as ashes. With Eunuch Luo's words, Chu Qingge knew that the emperor had grown suspicious of the Mu family today. Naturally, Eunuch Luo was behind the emperor's sudden summons to the Mu family to ask about the betrayal of the imperial guards. Her older brother had said that the emperor had his suspicions about the Chu clan as well. She had to have Eunuch Luo stir things up first before she whispered in his ear. That way, Emperor Tianhui wouldn't be so wary. Chu Qingge personally carried a bowl of ginseng soup she'd prepared beforehand and strode inside. Currently, Emperor Tianhui had just finished bathing and was drinking tea with only a robe draped over his shoulders. After resting for a while, it would be time for morning court. Emperor Tianhui gave a start at the sight of Chu Qingge. Her robes were open to reveal a pure white lantern dress that fell to her chest. Her cold and aloof temperament matched with this kind of clothing actually didn't feel out of place. She had an otherworldly coldness, but also an insufferably arrogant coldness. Emperor Tianhui loved nothing more than this woman's aloof demeanor. What he truly liked was conquering it. Although he was on guard against this woman from the Chu clan, Emperor Tianhui still couldn't stop his heart from throbbing. He stroked his beard and smiled. Beloved consort, you're up so early today. Chu Qingge saw the wretched look in Emperor Tianhui's eyes, but forced herself to ignore it. She offered up the ginseng soup and asked, Qinxia came to disturb you. Isn't your majesty angry? Beloved consort, did you make a special trip to disturb me? Emperor Tianhui asked with a grin. Something so big happened last night. The Empress Dowager was afraid that your majesty would overwork himself after a sleepless night, so she ordered Qinxie to deliver ginseng soup, Chu Qingge replied neutrally. Emperor Tianhui grew curious. Why would the Empress Dowager let you come? The Empress Dowager and noble consort Shui viewed Chu Qingge as a formidable foe. Emperor Tianhui was well aware of that fact. No one else dared to come, I suppose. The explosion was so loud that it must have happened in the capital. They were afraid that the emperor would get angry and scold them if they came. Chu Qingge spoke bluntly without fear of offending anyone. In truth, the Empress Dowager hadn't let her come at all. But Emperor Tianhui believed her words. Not only that, but he'd even let his guard down. He looked Chu Qingge up and down before his gaze unconsciously rested on her low collar. He gave it a long look before patting the spot next to him with a grin. Since beloved consort isn't afraid of being scolded, then come over. Your majesty should hurry and drink the ginseng soup so Qinxie can report back to the Empress Dowager. It's getting late, your majesty should be in morning court by now. As Chu Qingge spoke, she bent down to pick up the ginseng soup. Her collar hung low, revealing a hint of spring in and out of sight, making for an alluring sight. Seeing this, Emperor Tianhui couldn't help himself. He suddenly scooped her into his arms and held her tight. Eunuch Luo had long placed bewitching drugs in the incense burner. Add that to Chu Qingge's good intentions, and there was no way Emperor Tianhui could resist her. Chapter 497. Emperor Tianhui wrapped his arms tightly around Chu Qingge's waist and buried his head in her neck to sniff as if he was addicted. No matter how much he sniffed, he couldn't get enough. His hands were restless as they groped their way up her waist. Chu Qingge raised her head to stare at the ceiling. As Emperor Tianhui reached for a yard after taking an inch, she gritted her teeth harder and harder. Her clothes were stripped off piece by piece as he ravaged her full breasts. A line of clear tears slid down her cold cheeks before she finally closed her eyes. Would she be able to see nothing as long as she closed her eyes? Would she be able to assume that the man on top of her was the same man from her dreams? If it was him, thinking about him, would it not be so painful? Long Fei Yi, Chu Qingge almost cried out, but she held on to her reason. She only dared to say the name in her heart, because she knew that she'd lose everything as soon as she did. She'd also cause trouble for him. Abruptly, a stab of pain came from her lower body. Chu Qingge's eyes widened as her heart shattered from the pain. The pain jolted her awake from her beautiful fantasies to face the cruel reality. Emperor Tianhui had been drooling over her for a long time. Now that he was under the influence of the drug, he was like a wild horse galloping over Chu Qingge's body. Men, especially those in high positions and power, viewed women as playthings in the end. No matter how much they liked a woman, that was all. When their lust flared up and they couldn't hold back their urges, they only cared about enjoying themselves to the fullest. Who cared if you lived or died? Thanks to a certain imperial physician, Tianhui had already been a vegetarian for 2 months. Now that he'd started eating meat, he was like a ravenous wolf, a tiger, or a leopard. That morning, Chu Qingge's soul had been ravaged to pieces. After Emperor Tianhui fell asleep, she was like a rag doll whose soul had been sucked out of her. She lay powerlessly on the cold marble floor, unmoving. Only the tears at the corners of her eyes flowed uncontrollably. She knew that from this moment onwards, there was no turning back. She didn't know how long she lay there until the effects of the drug wore off and Emperor Tianhui was about to wake up. She endured the pain and dressed herself before calling for Eunuch Luo to carry him to the bed. Eunuch Luo opened the windows to disperse the aphrodisiac scent in the room as he spoke in a low voice. Esteemed noble consort, this old servant has already given orders. His Majesty is ill, so he won't be attending morning court today. If noble consort Shui comes over later, this old servant will block her for you. You'd better hurry up and get down to business. If His Highness the Crown Prince comes, I won't be able to stop him. Chu Qingge only nodded and sat on the bed without a word. As soon as Eunuch Luo left, she grabbed the bedding covers, eager to suffocate Emperor Tianhui to death. She was helpless. This was just an impulsive action. She didn't dare and couldn't. She stood guard quietly, her head repeating her elder brother's words over and over again. How to give Emperor Tianhui pillow talk was the key to the overall situation. By the time Emperor Hui woke up that day, Chu Qingge was only wrapped in a silk quilt and nestled in his arms. After a romantic morning, Emperor Tianhui only remembered that he'd enjoyed himself to his heart's content. He'd long forgotten the details. He looked at Chu Qingge's cold, sleeping face and was extremely satisfied. His hand reached out and took advantage of her again. Chu Qingge pretended to wake up in fright and slapped Emperor Tianhui's hand away. Let go. Even the most favored concubines in the imperial harem, including the empress of the past, didn't dare to refuse him like this. Emperor Tianhui's eyes flashed with indignation, but he didn't speak. His other hand reached out to bully her as well. Chu Qingge kept slapping his hand away and huffed. Your Majesty, that's enough. And if Shen says it's not enough? Tianhui arched a brow. Then Your Majesty can continue. Qinxia can't escape anyways. Chu Qingge's words were soft, but her eyes were stubborn. Emperor Tianhui liked her haughtiness the most. Instead of getting angry, he laughed out loud. Fine, fine, fine. Zhen will let you off for now. Despite his words, he didn't release her. Instead, he tightened his grip around her. Chu Qingge struggled a few times, but gave up when she couldn't break free. Your Majesty, do you know what time it is right now? Her reminder reminded Emperor Tianhui of the morning court session. What time is it now? Zhen hasn't started morning court yet. He was about to rise to his feet when he felt dizzy. Damn it, Imperial Physician Gu had told him multiple times not to have sex because it consumed too much energy. Why couldn't he resist? Your Majesty, are you all right? Are you tired? Chu Qingge asked hastily. How could Emperor Tianhui admit that he was tired? Despite his anxiety, he still sat down. What time is it now? It's already past noon. Your Majesty, Qinxia tried to persuade you this morning, but you insisted on having Eunuch Luo cancelled the morning court session. Qinxia knows that today's morning court session is very important after what happened last night, but, as Chu Qingge spoke, she placed a jade hand over Emperor Tianhui's heart and lowered her head shyly. Emperor Tianhui lifted her chin with a grin. But what? Your Majesty. Chu Qingge pouted playfully at him. Emperor Tianhui was in a good mood. A complicated look flickered past his eyes as he probed, beloved consort knows about what happened last night as well. The explosion was so loud that it must have happened somewhere in the capital, Chu Qingge replied. About that, what does beloved consort think? Emperor Tianhui probed again. Someone was secretly hiding gunpowder. As Qinxia sees it, there's an 80% chance that it's related to the crossbow archers who tried to assassinate Qin Wangfei. Perhaps they were trying to create chaos so they could escape. Chu Qingge's words were exactly the same as the crown prince's. Emperor Tianhui was surprised. He thought this woman would speak up for the Chu clan. Secretly hiding gunpowder. How could gunpowder be so easy to get? Emperor Tianhui gave a cold snort. Chu Qingge didn't think so. The gunpowder is all in the hands of the military. How could it be hard to get? Emperor Tianhui assumed that Chu Qingge would seize the chance to trample on General Mu's estate, but she scooted by his ear and murmured, "Your Majesty, Qinxie will tell you a secret. Qinxie came into contact with gunpowder before I married. Actually, the military's control over it isn't so strict." Now Emperor Tianhui was even more surprised. This woman dared to say such things to him. Wasn't she afraid that he'd suspect the Chu clan? Or perhaps the Chu clan hadn't done anything at all, so they weren't afraid of suspicion. Looking at the beauty's magnanimous eyes, Emperor Tianhui recalled how the Crown Prince and Mu Qingwu had been insinuating insinuations against the Chu clan without any proof. Beloved consort, then as you see it, which military group did the gunpowder come from? Emperor Tianhui asked next. Your Majesty, you can eat carelessly, but you can't speak carelessly. Qinxie doesn't dare to speak carelessly about such an important matter. So speaking, she added, in any case, it can't escape my Chu clan, Tianning's Mu family, or Northern Li's Yuan clan. Emperor Tianhui looked at her for a long time before suddenly pressing closer. Noble consort Chu, what if the gunpowder really came from your Chu clan? Your Chu clan is skilled in archery, while those crossbow archers are skilled as well. Could all of that be a coincidence? Chu Qingge was furious. If your Majesty already knows the answer, then why ask Qinxie? You might as well lock Qinxie up and torture her to prevent that good-for-nothing Mu Qingwu from turning traitor and harassing the people. We still can't catch him. You're saying that Mu Qingwu's a good-for-nothing? Emperor Tianhui couldn't believe it. Mu Qingwu was very bold. Cold, he retorted, isn't that the case? Even the soldiers he personally led turned traitor. If that's not a good-for-nothing, then what is? Qinxie didn't believe it at first, but I never expected it to be true. Emperor Tianhui hadn't believed it either. Of course, he was more suspicious of Mu Qingwu's impulsive decision to kill that commander. In some ways, such actions were meant to silence witnesses. Emperor Tianhui looked at Chu Qingge. Although he didn't probe any further, the scales in his heart had tilted to one side. Still, he kept all of this to himself. Ever since the gunpowder incident at the black market, he hadn't expressed his stance on the matter to anyone. He was still observing the situation and weighing the pros and cons. After all, this incident threatened the safety of the capital. In other words, it was a threat to his throne, so he had to be extremely cautious. There were still 3 days left. He wanted to see what kind of explanation General Mu had for the explosion at the military depot. Seeing Chu Qingge's alluring figure, Emperor Tianhui almost wanted to spoil her again. Unfortunately, he didn't have the strength to do so. After teasing her for a bit longer, Emperor Tianhui allowed Chu Qingge to leave. As soon as she left the profound dragon palace, she ran into noble consort Shui, who was waiting outside. So it was noble consort Chu. In broad daylight, this consort was wondering who had such great ability. Noble consort Shui didn't finish her sentence, but her words were full of sarcasm. Without a doubt, she was mocking Chu Qingge for her shameless actions in broad daylight. Chu Qingge had just finished putting on an act in front of Emperor Tianhui and was exhausted. Her heart was filled with bitterness, so the humiliation made her want to cry. She gave noble consort Shui a cold look before turning to leave. Noble consort Shui gave eunuch Luo a meaningful look before realizing something. She quickly left for the Empress Dowager's palace. Chu Qingge was probably behind the emperor's absence from morning court. If the emperor showed favor at a time like this, it'd be disadvantageous for the crown prince and the rest. As soon as Emperor Tianhui opened his mouth, the harem would be filled with infighting. But Emperor Tianhui's health was far worse than expected. He rested for a long time before taking another dose of medicine to recover his strength. As soon as he reached the imperial study, he didn't even bother with the memorials he'd received that morning before issuing orders. Pass on Zhen's verbal decree to summon the Duke of Qin into the palace. Qin Wangfei, too, should be summoned. Emperor Tianhui had been probing all sorts of people, so he naturally wouldn't forget about His Highness Duke of Qin. He wanted to hear what Long Feiyi thought about the black market gunpowder, the assassination with crossbow bolts, and the explosion at the military depot. The victim of the assassination attempt was his Wangfei, but Long Feiyi hadn't made any moves after rescuing Han Yunxi from the brothel. He couldn't be plotting something, right? When Emperor Tianhui's verbal decree reached the Duke of Qin's estate, Long Feiyi had no choice but to leave early to heal his wounds. He was about to leave when Chu Shifeng timidly added, "Your Highness, His Majesty summoned esteemed Wangfei as well." Long Feiyi stopped abruptly, leaving Zhao Mama and Bailey Mingxiang to grow anxious. They didn't know about His Highness Duke of Qin's injuries, nor did they know esteemed Wangfei's condition. Neither of them dared to go to the Han estate without permission, but they did know that the two masters had made a huge fuss this time. Everyone waited timidly for His Highness Duke of Qin to speak, but Long Feiyi only stood there without a word. In the end, it was Chu Shifeng who spoke up. "Your Highness, how about this subordinate go to the Han estate and bring esteemed Wangfei here?" Chapter 498. Although Chu Shifeng had some complaints about esteemed Wangfei, he was very clear that His Highness couldn't let go of that woman. Of course, he hoped that the two of them would patch things up soon. Otherwise, His Highness's icy face would leave his subordinates trembling in fear. After all, when esteemed Wangfei was in the estate, everyone was much more relaxed. No matter how angry His Highness was, esteemed Wangfei only needed to say a few good words to smooth things over. But now even Chu Shifeng had to tread carefully, much less everyone else. Using Emperor Tianhui's summons as an excuse, he could go fetch esteemed Wangfei back. Even if he said it was His Highness who sent him, esteemed Wangfei should yield, right? Seeing His Highness Duke of Qin remain silent, Chu Shifeng probed, "Your Highness, should this subordinate go?" At this moment, Bailey Mingxiang suddenly spoke up. "Your Highness, why don't you enter the palace from the north gates? You can pick up esteemed Wangfei on the way." The Duke of Qin's estate was closer to the south gates, while the Han estate was closer to the north. If he brought Han Yunxi to the Duke of Qin's estate, he'd have to go through the south gates. If Long Feiyi went to find Han Yunxi, then he'd have to go through the north gates. Actually, the journey was the same. The key lay in whether Han Yunxi came or Long Feiyi went. Bailey Mingxiang was a woman, so she understood women better than Chu Shifeng. She was also more meticulous. She mused that with esteemed Wangfei's temper, esteemed Wangfei might not return with Chu Shifeng if His Highness didn't pick her up personally. Unless a woman's heart had given up, she'd always wait for her husband to pick her up. But if His Highness Duke of Qin went personally, everything would be different. What conflict couldn't be resolved if he went personally? Chu Shifeng and Zhao Mama both understood what Bailey Mingxiang meant by her suggestion. Chu Shifeng snorted disdainfully, thinking that His Highness Duke of Qin wouldn't agree. But instead, His Highness Duke of Qin simply said, "You can come with me." Her. Come with him. Bailey Mingxiang's heart gave a lurch as she felt overwhelmed by the favor. If Zhao Mama hadn't shoved her aside, she wouldn't have reacted. His Highness wanted her to follow. Before she could even catch up, her heart was already pounding non-stop. When His Highness Duke of Qin had already walked far away, Bailey Mingxiang hurriedly chased after him under Zhao Mama's urging. She didn't dare to get too close and kept a distance of 3 steps from him. After boarding the carriage, Bailey Mingxiang consciously sat next to the coachman. His heart was filled with anxiety all the way to the Han residence. As soon as the carriage stopped, a cold voice came from inside. "Go and call him out." "Yes." Bailey Mingxiang naturally knew that His Highness had asked her to come along to persuade the Princess Consort. She hesitated for a moment, but still mustered up her courage and whispered, "Your Highness, we're already at the door." "Why don't we?" Unfortunately, before he could finish his sentence, Long Feiyi reprimanded him coldly. "What nonsense are you spouting? Why aren't you going?" Bailey Mingxiang's heart almost jumped out of her mouth. She turned to leave. No, she ran. At this moment, Han Yunxi was changing the dressing on her own wound. Last night, she'd heard from Su Donglin that the Duke of Qin's estate hadn't made any moves, so she felt at ease. She mused that Long Feiyi hadn't made a move despite such a big incident in the capital. Most likely, he was still sitting on top of the mountain to watch the tigers fight. As long as he didn't get involved, she didn't have anything to worry about. In any case, she hated these senseless fights in Tianning's imperial harem. Han Yunxi reacted calmly to Bailey Mingxiang's arrival. She only assumed that Bailey Mingxiang had come to persuade her to return. "You came just in time. I'm lacking a helper here," Han Yunxi said mildly. Bailey Mingxiang saw the mangled flesh on her shoulder and felt distressed. He quickly took over the gauze and helped her treat it. "Esteemed Wang Fei, why didn't you find little Chen Xiang for help?" Forget about little Chen Xiang, Han Yunxi didn't even want to see Lady Helene. That group of people had urged her to return as soon as they arrived. She treated her maternal home as a safe haven, but that group of people couldn't wait for her to leave. Han Yunxi didn't speak, but lazily sprawled on the bed, enjoying Bailey Mingxiang's service. Bailey Mingxiang coaxed her as he bandaged her wound. "Esteemed Wang Fei, why don't you return?" Han Yunxi pretended not to hear, but Bailey Mingxiang said again, "Esteemed Wang Fei, His Highness sent this servant to pick you up." That wasn't the end of the sentence. "His Highness sent this servant to pick you up," and "His Highness sent this servant to pick you up in a carriage to enter the palace" had completely different meanings. Still, no matter what the meaning was, Han Yunxi's gloomy face relaxed quite a bit. Still, she didn't say a word. Bailey Mingxiang wasn't in a rush to coax her, but carefully finished bandaging the wound. Actually, esteemed Wang Fei's wound was very deep. Moreover, it hadn't been stitched up, so it took a lot of effort to bandage it up. After a long while, Bailey Mingxiang finished. Afraid that His Highness would grow impatient waiting outside, she quickly asked, "Esteemed Wang Fei, shall this servant help you tidy up?" "No need," Han Yunxi refused. Esteemed Wang Fei, husband and wife quarrel at the head of the bed, but reconcile at the foot of the bed. His Highness has already yielded, so why don't you come back with this servant?" Bailey Mingxiang persuaded earnestly. Han Yunxi mused to herself. Does this count as yielding? Does he believe in my innocence? Chu Shifeng's first complaint was enough for that guy to show up in the middle of the night. Couldn't he come himself now? Would she go back just because he sent someone to pick her up? And after that? Would he still not believe her? Or wouldn't he explain where he and Duan Muyao had gone? Would he keep arguing with her? Or would he just forget about everything and pretend nothing ever happened? Since she'd already returned to the Han estate, there was no reason for her to go back without a clear explanation. Esteemed Wang Fei, then what will it take for you to come back with this servant? Bailey Mingxiang coaxed again. Han Yunxi replied offhandedly, unless he comes in person. Hadn't Bailey Mingxiang been waiting for these exact words? Thrilled, she grabbed Han Yunxi's hand and said, Esteemed Wang Fei, quick, come with this servant. What for? Han Yunxi didn't understand. Bailey Mingxiang didn't explain, but pulled her outside until they reached the Han estate gates. Han Yunxi halted her steps at the sight of the luxurious carriage parked outside. This was the Duke of Qin's highest-grade carriage. Who else would dare to use it except for Long Feiyi? Did he really come in person? Seeing esteemed Wang Fei's surprise and delight, Bailey Mingxiang's heart finally settled down. In a low voice, she said, "Esteemed Wangfei, you have to keep your word. His Majesty summoned you and His Highness to the palace. Once you leave, you'll have to go back with His Highness." She didn't say that His Highness Duke of Qin was here to pick up esteemed Wangfei, but set up a trap for esteemed Wangfei to jump into. She wanted esteemed Wangfei to think that His Highness's true purpose was to pick her up and that going to the palace was just a side trip. She had to admit that Bailey Mingxiang was very smart. But what kind of person was Han Yunqi? How could she not see through such little tricks? As soon as she heard the words "go to the palace," she guessed what was going on. As it turned out, Emperor Tianhui had summoned her and Long Fei. Long Fei must have come to pick her up along the way. But for some strange reason, she didn't expose them. Instead, she agreed with Bailey Mingxiang. Bailey Mingxiang rejoiced. She knew that esteemed Wangfei had a stubborn temper, but her heart was still soft before His Highness Duke of Qin. Now all she had to do was wait for His Highness and esteemed Wangfei to leave the palace before fanning the flames a little. Then she'd have His Highness yield a little and succeed. Master and servant were about to head for the carriage when Long Fei Ye's sharp voice came from inside. "Are we going or not?" This wasn't his first time here. The first time was when he came to deliver the medical pouch. He'd already yielded twice, so what else did this woman want? He'd been waiting in the carriage for almost an hour. He almost thought that she wouldn't come out. Han Yunqi stopped in her tracks. She didn't want to ask any more questions, but her heart grew cold. This was his attitude when he came to pick her up in person. So impatient. If he waited so long, wouldn't he come in and take a look? If Emperor Tianhui hadn't summoned him, would he have come at all? "Your Highness," just then esteemed Wangfei was. Bailey Mingxiang wanted to explain, but Han Yunqi only glared at him coldly. "He only came to find me to enter the palace with him, right?" Bailey Mingxiang was put in a difficult spot, but still forced himself to lie. "Esteemed Wangfei, we'll return to the estate once we leave the palace. It's not like you don't know His Highness's temper. His Highness didn't sleep at all while you were gone. Just look at his face later, it won't look good." Han Yunqi's face was gloomy as she curtsied. "Qinxie greets your Highness. I've made you wait. It's good that you know. Hurry up and get in." Long Fei Ye's tone was filled with impatience. If Emperor Tianhui hadn't summoned her, Han Yunqi would probably flick her sleeves and leave already. Yes. She suppressed her anger as she got into the carriage. If this was the past, he'd always give her a hand whenever she got in or out of the carriage. But now, he sat unmoving in the carriage. Han Yunqi had already entered, but he didn't even spare her a glance. Han Yunqi maintained a respectful attitude as she sat in the seat furthest away from him with her head bowed. She hadn't even been this distant when she was 100 paces away from him in the past. As the carriage moved forward, the driver hurried along, but Bailey Mingxiang only said in a low voice, "Let's slow down a bit. There's no rush in the palace." There was still some distance between the Han estate and the palace. At least let master and mistress spend more time together. Bailey Mingxiang wasn't sure if she'd overreached herself this time, but her lips quirked up into a self-mocking smile. Inside the carriage, the silence was stifling enough to make it hard to breathe. The air between Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi seemed to grow heavy and heavy. Unconsciously, Han Yunqi looked up and saw that Long Fei Ye's complexion really wasn't looking too good. After all, she'd taken Bailey Mingxiang's lies to heart. Just what did this guy do with Duan Miao? Did something happen in Tianshan Kenzo? How did he get by these past few days? Did he really not sleep? Seeing that Long Fei Yi was about to look up, Han Yunqi immediately lowered her head again. Long Fei Yi did indeed raise his head and look over. His eyes were as cold as ice, but they were still focused on her shoulders. The clothes on her shoulders were smooth and clean, with no signs of bandages. Compared to Han Yunxi, his gaze was more wanton. He quickly studied her quiet little face again, as if inspecting a precious treasure he'd lent out to see if it was still in good condition. Still, he didn't say a word. Like this, the two of them walked in silence until they reached the palace gates. It was time to get off the carriage. Chapter 499. The carriage slowly came to a stop. It was time to get off. But Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi didn't move. One had his head bowed, making it impossible to see his expression, while the other was expressionless as she stared out the window. In the end, it was Han Yunxi who emerged first. She was about to jump off the carriage when Bailey Mingxiang hastily stopped her. "Esteemed Wang Fei, Mingxiang will help you." Han Yunxi didn't speak, but jumped off the carriage to avoid him. She wasn't some delicate flower, much less a sickly invalid. Why would she need someone to help her off the carriage? The driver was helpless at the sight. In the past, esteemed Wang Fei had always been helped on and off the carriage by His Highness. By now, Long Fei Yi had recovered his wits and silently got off the carriage. He glanced at Han Yunxi before walking towards the imperial study. Naturally, Han Yunxi followed him. Bailey Mingxiang didn't follow, but stood guard by the carriage with the driver. Han Yunxi was clearly distracted, so she didn't notice that Bailey Mingxiang wasn't following them. As she walked, she found it hard to keep up with Long Fei Yi. His legs were so long that she could take 2 steps with him. Only now did she realize that he'd purposely slowed down when he held her hand in the past. Thinking up to here, she didn't chase after him, but walked at her usual pace. But Long Fei Yi didn't slow down at all, but picked up his pace instead. As a result, the distance between the two of them grew wider and wider. As she watched Long Fei walk further and further away, Han Yunxi's expression grew uglier and uglier. She almost turned to leave. With his attitude, he probably wouldn't even notice if she suddenly disappeared. Damned Emperor Tianhui. It was enough to summon Long Fei Yi, but why did he summon her as well? Sulking, Han Yunxi cursed Emperor Tianhui countless times in her heart. By the time she reached the door to the imperial study, Long Fei Yi had already been waiting for her with a taut face. She still walked the remaining few steps quickly. However, as soon as she reached his side, he went straight into the house and left her with his back facing her. Long Fei Yi. Han Yunxi was so angry that she glared at him. Unfortunately, it was useless. He didn't have eyes on his back and couldn't see. She walked in with large strides, looking like she was telling strangers not to come near and acquaintances not to disturb her. Her expression was really twice as ugly as Long Fei Yi's. Emperor Tianhui disliked Long Fei Yi's cold face to begin with. Now that he saw Han Yunxi's expression, he assumed that this couple wasn't giving him any face and immediately grew gloomy. This assassination attempt had nothing to do with him. What was the attitude of these two people? Come and have a seat. Yunxi, did you get a fright this time? Emperor Tianhui asked with concern as he walked towards the tea table. He hadn't summoned the Duke of Qin and his wife to question them, but simply wanted to chat. No, Han Yunxi answered straightforwardly. Could she say that she was really frightened? Could she say that without Gu, she would have been shot to death by the arrows long ago? Could she really be frightened by the sight of Gu Qishao's battered back and bruised body? She wasn't here to complain and make Emperor Tianhui laugh at her. If Long Tianma and Mu Qinggu hadn't escalated the situation to the point of endangering the capital, Emperor Tianhui might even be thanking those crossbow archers. Did you get hurt? Emperor Tianhui asked next. No. Han Yunxi replied mildly. Emperor Tianhui was about to ask some more questions, but Han Yunxi's curt reply made him unable to continue. After sitting down, he made a gesture, and Long Fei Yi sat down across from him. There were only 2 seats at the table in the imperial study, so Han Yunxi had nowhere to sit. Emperor Tianhui should have given her a seat, but he didn't say a word. Instead, he slowly steeped some tea. Long Fei Yi didn't speak either, but Han Yunxi stood behind him like a servant girl. Her head and eyes were bowed, but her back was still ramrod straight. Emperor Tianhui was about to pour some tea for Long Fei Yi when Long Fei Yi stopped him. "I don't dare. Chindi will do it." His movements were 100 times more elegant than Emperor Tianhui's. "Imperial brother didn't make a special trip to find Chindi for tea, did you?" He started the conversation without paying any attention to Han Yunxi standing on one side. Emperor Tianhui glanced at Han Yunxi in astonishment. Could it be that the Duke of Qin had grown tired of this woman? Didn't he dote on her before? Is he just going to let her stand here and ignore her? Jin really did make a special trip to find you for tea. Ever since the black market gunpowder explosion, Jin's ears haven't had a moment of peace. Emperor Tianhui sighed with emotion. Imperial brother has worked hard for the country. "It's been hard on you," Long Fei Yi said half-heartedly. Emperor Tianhui sighed and asked, "Have you found any clues about those crossbow archers?" "You'll have to ask the Imperial Guards to find out. Chindi is waiting for news too." Long Fei Yi pushed the blame away. Emperor Tianhui suddenly lost his temper. Those useless Imperial Guards, they can't even find the culprit when they're trying to catch a turtle in a jar. Zhen will give Mu Qingwu 3 days. If he doesn't find the culprit by then, Zhen will cripple him. Long Fei Yi remained silent for a while before he said, "You can't blame the young general. Chindi personally searched for an entire day without finding the culprit." Emperor Tianhui was astonished by his words. Aside from the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet, the Duke of Qin had never shown favoritism to any faction despite his overwhelming power. But today he was speaking up for Mu Qingwu. He'd clearly stayed in the Duke of Qin's estate without making any moves over the past few days, so where did the search come from? Moreover, Mu Qingwu's subordinates had turned traitor and almost took Han Yunxi's life. Didn't that guy bear a grudge? Don't blame him. There's actually a traitor in the Imperial Guards. How serious is that? How can Jin not blame him? Emperor Tianhui slapped the table angrily. Long Fei Yi didn't feel any pain or itch. He has so many soldiers in his hands, so it's impossible to cover every single one of them. It's inevitable. If Imperial Brother wants to deal with him, he'll have to wait until this matter is over. Now's the time to use people. Emperor Tianhui's eyes flickered with complicated emotions. The Duke of Qin seemed to be aloof and neutral on the surface, but his words were clearly protecting Mu Qingwu. Was there some secret between the Duke of Qin's estate and General Mu's estate? Emperor Tianhui drank a few cups of tea before he spoke again. "You know what happened at the military depot last night, right? How could gunpowder be so easy to get? As Chindi sees it, this incident and that incident at the black market aren't much different." Emperor Tianhui was more concerned about that than anything else. "What do you mean?" he asked anxiously. "Only the armies of the 2 nations have access to gunpowder. General Mu wouldn't be stupid enough to light it up in front of his own house, right?" Long Fei Yi laughed lightly. His words were obviously suspecting the Chu clan. Emperor Tianhui laughed coldly. What if he was hiding it for himself and accidentally detonated it? This, Long Fei Yi gave him a meaningful look, but stopped favoring the Mu clan. That's hard to say. Chindi was only guessing on the spur of the moment. As for the truth, it's still up to Imperial Brother to decide. But his previous words had already planted the seeds of doubt in Emperor Tianhui's heart. General Mu's estate held one of Tianning's 3 largest military forces and commanded 100,000 imperial guards. It was only natural that they were loyal to Tianning, but who they were loyal to had always been a variable. This was especially true after His Highness Duke of Qin's forces grew strong enough to contend against Emperor Tianhui's. He seemed to be neutral on the surface, but was actually the most worrisome of all. It wasn't until Emperor Tianhui reactivated the Crown Prince and united father and son against the Duke of Qin's estate that General Mu's stance became clear. In front of the Duke of Qin, Emperor Tianhui wouldn't be on guard against his own son for now. He'd also included General Mu's estate in his own sphere of influence. But now the Imperial Guards had changed sides, the Crown Prince was insinuating insinuations and squeezing out noble Consort Chu, the military depot had exploded, and the Duke of Qin's attitude today, how could the paranoid Emperor Tianhui set his heart at ease? What Long Feiyi wanted was for Emperor Tianhui to grow suspicious of the Mu clan and the Crown Prince. After being reactivated, the Crown Prince had long harbored thoughts of rebelling and usurping the throne. But he'd always lacked the right opportunity to do so. Now was a good chance. Of course, the Crown Prince was still too young and inexperienced to accomplish anything on his own. But things would be different if the Mu clan had thoughts of rebellion as well. As long as the Mu clan could harden their hearts to help the Crown Prince, the Chu clan wouldn't be able to reap any benefits no matter what they did. Long Feiyi hadn't made a move this entire time, but he was still keeping track of the situation. At this point, Emperor Tianhui didn't ask any more questions, but started chatting about other irrelevant topics. Long Feiyi kept to himself as he replied, even nodding his head several times without saying a word. As they chatted and drank tea, 2 hours passed by. Han Yinxi's legs were sore from all the standing. She couldn't help but glance at Long Feiyi multiple times, but Long Feiyi seemed to have forgotten about her existence and completely ignored her. Of course Emperor Tianhui remembered her existence. He gave her a meaningful look before having eunuch Luo set up the chessboard. Duke of Qin, you haven't exchanged pointers with Zhen in a long time. If you don't lose today, I won't let you go. Who would dare to win a game of chess against the Emperor? But Long Feiyi dared. He'd played chess countless times since he was young and had never lost a single match. Long Feiyi didn't speak, but the white and black chess pieces soon began to play against each other. Long Feiyi's stance showed that he wasn't planning to lose. If he wasn't planning to lose, did that mean he wasn't planning to leave? Han Yinxi kept her eyes lowered as she stared at the chessboard. She was alone in a world of silence. This game of chess went on for a full 4 hours. By the time night fell, there was still no winner. Including the previous 2 hours, Han Yinxi had been standing for a total of 6 hours. Her calves had even gone numb. In the end, an urgent report arrived, prompting Emperor Tianhui to stop the game. Looks like Zhen has no choice but to let you go today. Chindi should take his leave as well. Long Feiyi lazily rose to his feet. He walked easily, but Han Yinxi's legs almost gave way as soon as she took a step. Still, she steadied herself. Her calves grew numb with each step, but she kept her back straight and her head held high as she followed him out. Emperor Tianhui stared at their departing figures, filled with doubts. He was trying to figure out what had happened between Long Feiyi and Han Yinxi, but the current situation in the capital made him too preoccupied to think about it. Just like before, Long Feiyi was walking in front while Han Yinxi followed behind. But she was no longer looking at his back, but staring at the road with her head bowed. She didn't know how long she'd been walking, but she only lifted her head when she reached the palace gates. Actually, she didn't like looking at his back because it gave her a sense of unfamiliarity. But this time, she didn't even have time to look at Long Feiyi's back, because Long Feiyi had already boarded his carriage. Chapter 500. Seeing esteemed Wang Fei walk out alone, Bailey Mingxiang hurriedly ran over to receive her. Esteemed Wang Fei, get in the carriage. His Highness is waiting. Where are we going? Han Yunqi asked indifferently. Back to the palace with His Highness. Esteemed Wang Fei, you said that as long as His Highness personally came, you would return to the palace. Quickly get in the carriage. His Highness is waiting. Although Bailey Mingxiang was comforting her with a smile, her heart was very uncomfortable. She never thought that His Highness would come out first and even get into the carriage. Did something happen between the two of them in the palace? Why was esteemed Wang Fei so disappointed? Han Yunqi didn't say anything as she seriously looked at Bailey Mingxiang. Bailey Mingxiang was still resisting at first, but soon he couldn't take it anymore and avoided her gaze. Go tell, he doesn't need to wait for me. Saying this, she prepared to leave, but Bailey Mingxiang hurriedly pulled her back. Get in the carriage. It's not like you don't know His Highness' temper. If you yield one step, His Highness will definitely yield 10 steps. Han Yunqi insisted on leaving, but Bailey Mingxiang wouldn't let her go. He earnestly tried to persuade her, esteemed Wang Fei, if His Highness didn't have you in his heart, he would have left long ago, right? He's still waiting in the carriage. You should think about it carefully. Han Yunqi looked at Bailey Mingxiang and her eyes suddenly turned red. All the grievances she had felt in the imperial study came flooding back. Mingxiang, my leg hurts. Leg? What's wrong with esteemed Wang Fei's leg? Bailey Mingxiang was anxious. He was about to crouch down to inspect her leg when His Highness Duke of Qin's impatient voice came from the carriage. Han Yunqi, why aren't you leaving yet? His tone was so fierce. He had never been this fierce since she'd met him. Ever since he accompanied her to pay respects to Empress Dowager Li, he would often rush her. No matter how anxious and impatient he would always stop 3 to 5 steps away from her and turn to look at her. Coldly, he asked, Han Yunqi, aren't you leaving yet? He had never abandoned her, nor had he ever gotten angry. But this time, he had left her on the road. He was so fierce. Han Yunqi strode to the window and asked coldly, Your Highness, please wait for a moment. I have something to ask Your Highness. I'll leave after that. In truth, the entire journey from the Han estate to the palace gates had left her feeling incredibly stifled. She really wanted to ask about Duan Muyao, explain about Gu, and quarrel with Long Fei Yi. However, after being mercilessly forgotten in the imperial study, she suddenly felt powerless. She suddenly did not want to say anything. If one had to work very hard to be liked by someone, then what was the point of being liked? Right now, she only wanted to clarify that question and then leave. Speak, he said coldly. The antidote that Gu gave, was it really only 80% full? Han Yunqi asked very seriously. As soon as she said this, the carriage fell silent. He said that the antidote he gave was indeed a full bottle, Han Yunqi added. However, the carriage remained silent. Han Yunqi waited patiently and did not rush him. After an indeterminate amount of time, Long Fei Yi finally spoke. So you believe him? Han Yunqi avoided answering. I'm just asking Your Highness. You believe him and suspect this prince? Long Fei Yi asked again. Han Yunqi only heard his cold voice, but did not know that he had been absent-minded in the carriage for a long time. She did not know how much hatred this man had endured, how much effort he had put in, how many plans he had messed up, and how many sleepless nights he had endured, from the moment he had decided to hide that matter until the moment mute Granny hanged herself. From the moment they entered the palace until now, he had deliberately ignored her in order to provoke her into speaking up, to provoke her into rushing in front of him to argue with him. But who would have thought that this woman would ask such a question the moment she opened her mouth? It's Gu again. It's Gu again. As it turned out, she had unconditionally trusted him in Medicine Ghost Valley only because he was the Gu Chi Sha she loathed. Now that it was Gu, she immediately began to question her trust. This time, Han Yunxi fell silent. Han Yunxi, answer this prince's question. Long Fei Yi said angrily. Gu brought me to find Mute Granny, so if he's really Gu Chi Sha, then he definitely wouldn't have hidden the antidote for himself, Han Yunxi replied objectively. She was not an idiot. Back then, she had indeed been prejudiced against Gu Chi Sha, which was why she had blindly believed that Gu Chi Sha had tricked them. But now that she was facing Gu Chi Sha, she was not biased. She was only thinking rationally. Even though she did not say it outright, everyone understood what she was implying. Whoever had hidden the antidote for the broomcorn millet poison would have Mute Granny in their hands. By hiding Mute Granny, they were undoubtedly hiding the mystery of her origins. You think that Mute Granny is in this prince's hands? He did not know what Long Fei Ye's expression was like in the carriage, but he actually went straight to the point. Gu wouldn't have hidden it for himself. Then why did he put in the ineffective powder? Why did the ineffective powder so coincidentally turn the porcelain bottle black? Long Fei Yi asked again. Gu was not only pill fiend, he was also the black-robed man who had barged into the hidden pavilion. He had done all of this to arouse Han Yunxi's suspicions. He would definitely not let this matter rest. He, Long Fei Yi, had never needed to lie to any woman. But since he had already told this woman, he would definitely not admit to it. Even if he died, he would not admit it. In the face of Long Fei Ye's questioning, Han Yunxi recalled what Gu had said that night. She was in a mess. In the end, she said indifferently, "Your Highness, just pretend that I didn't ask." With that, she powerlessly turned and left. However, Long Fei Yi alighted from the carriage and shouted angrily, "Han Yunxi, stop right there." Han Yunxi really did stop in her tracks. "Does your Highness have any other orders? You still haven't answered this prince's question. Do you think that Mute Granny is in this prince's hands?" Long Fei Ye's dark eyes were filled with stubbornness. However, Han Yunxi remained silent. Long Fei Yi grabbed her hand fiercely. "Answer me." However, Han Yunxi ultimately lowered her head. This man's contemptuous smile in the brothel had pierced her heart. She was no longer the foolish woman who would stare at him foolishly. Before she could clearly distinguish right from wrong, she wouldn't believe Gu. She wouldn't believe him. She wouldn't believe anyone. Finally, Long Fei Yi released her hand and coldly ordered, "Someone, send her back to the Han estate." Han Yunxi's heart skipped a beat, but a self-deprecating smile appeared on her face. She had guessed correctly. Bailey Mingxiang had been lying to her all this time. "Fine, I'll go back." "Long Fei Yi, if I go back, I'll never come back." Bailey Mingxiang was scared out of her wits. She didn't dare to persuade His Highness Duke of Qin and could only chase after esteemed Wang Fei. Unfortunately, by the time she chased after him, the coachman had already left and Long Fei Yi had already disappeared. Looking at the empty space behind her, Bailey Mingxiang suddenly didn't know how to persuade him. At this moment, any words would be useless. His Highness Duke of Qin really had left. Han Yunxi didn't take the carriage, but endured the pain in her legs to walk back to the Han estate. Bailey Mingxiang followed her all the way until she settled down at the Han estate. As soon as Long Fei Yi returned to the Duke of Qin's estate, he ordered Chu Shifeng to do something. "Stop all of Pill Fiend Pharmacy's construction," he ordered cold. Chu Shifeng could clearly sense His Highness Duke of Qin's rage, but he still asked timidly, "What about South Ning Prefecture? Stop everything." Long Fei Yi raged. Chu Shifeng had no choice but to do as he was told. His Highness had just told him to secretly build a large pharmacy in South Ning Prefecture that was twice as big as the one in the capital. Moreover, His Highness and Medicine City's Wang Gong had designed the blueprints together. It looks like it's not just a simple argument this time. Chu Shifeng could only do as he was told. As soon as he left, Tang Li showed up. Tang Li was about to fall ill from boredom at the hidden pavilion. Now that he was spared, he was as happy as a bird released from its cage. Big bro, when you're better, we brothers can work together and kill off that goo guy. I refuse to believe he's so lucky. Go to Celestial Mountain for me, Long Feiyi said. Tang Li's expression changed. What for? He had run away from the wedding and caused the Tang clan to offend the bride's faction. His father had kept the bride's side in check while having Aunt Ru lead a group of people to search for him. Meanwhile, he was hiding in the most dangerous and safest hidden pavilion. Every month, he would release a fake trail to lure the old folks into running in circles. This month, Aunt Ru and the rest would probably go to Celestial Mountain as well. If he went there now, he'd be seeking death. Go see my master for me. Long Feiyi's sorrowful tone made Tang Li feel heavy as well. He sighed softly and said, "All right, I'll go." Afterwards, Long Feiyi met with General Bailey again. The two of them had a secret conversation behind closed doors, but it was impossible to know what they discussed. As soon as General Bailey returned to the Bailey estate, he transferred a few mermaid soldiers to hide in the Han estate's lake and wait for orders. Meanwhile, Long Feiyi returned to his quarters to continue treating his wounds. His seclusion lasted for 10 days and 10 nights. Within those 10 days, the capital city fell into chaos. Then all of Tianning fell into chaos. 3 days later, General Mu discovered that the gunpowder had exploded inside the military depot, not outside the walls. When Emperor Tianhui found out, he flew into a rage and questioned the Mu family about their secret stash of gunpowder. General Mu denied it, saying that the location of the explosion wasn't enough evidence. As for the truth, whether one of his subordinates had stashed the gunpowder away, or someone had planted the evidence to frame them still needed to be investigated. Without any evidence, Emperor Tianhui had no right to condemn the Mu family. Still, he reduced General Mu's military authority in front of all the civil and military officials and gave the 1st Artillery Corps to the Minister of War, Lord Wu, to take charge of. Naturally, he gave the gunpowder storehouse to the Ministry of War as well. At the same time, because the Imperial Guard still hadn't found the whereabouts of the crossbowmen, Emperor Tianhui removed Mu Qingwu from his position as Great General of the Imperial Guards and replaced him with Deputy General Meng Zhan. It had to be said that the Mu family had taken a huge tumble this time. The Imperial Guards and the 1st Artillery Corps were all elite soldiers who were directly responsible for the safety of the capital city. How could anyone not feel heartache when they were gone? The Mu family's hearts were dripping blood, but Crown Prince Long Tianma felt even worse. As soon as court was over, the Crown Prince lost his cool and rushed straight to the Mu family to interrogate Mu Qingwu. Just what's the deal with that commander of the Imperial Guards? Speak. Mu Qingwu's face was filled with resentment, but he didn't speak. Long Tianma glared at General Mu. Great General, speak. General Mu's expression was grave as he fell silent. If you don't speak, how can this Crown Prince help you? Imperial Father is only taking the first step. Don't you know that noble Consort Chu's already been favored? If you keep pillow talk, you'll have no choice but to admit to your secret stash of gunpowder. Long Tianmo raged. Finally, Mu Qingwu couldn't take it anymore. Father, His Highness Crown Prince has the right to know. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.